Kira's purple skin fades to a sickly gray as she lies dying of the galactic plague ravaging her people. The once bustling Daxamite hospital ward now stands silent, filled with the rasping breaths of billions succumbing to the deadly virus. Earth's first interstellar diplomatic mission arrives on the alien world, a last desperate hope for the dying civilization. Dr. Edward Harris steps through the hospital's decontamination field, his hazmat suit hissing as it adjusts to the alien atmosphere. The brilliant human epidemiologist surveys the dire scene before him, his heart heavy with the weight of his mission. The Galactic Council has tasked Earth with providing aid to the Daxamites, humanity's immunity to the plague their sole advantage in a universe brought to its knees. Edward's gaze falls on Kira, her frail form barely visible beneath a tangle of alien medical equipment. He approaches her bed, drawn by an inexplicable pull. His hands, steady from years of medical practice, tremble slightly as he activates his diagnostic tools. The readings confirm his worst fears. Without intervention, Kira has hours left to live. Daxamite doctors crowd around Edward, their voices a cacophony of desperation as they explain their failed attempts to cure the plague. Advanced alien technology, capable of marvels beyond human comprehension, proves useless against this microscopic enemy. Edward listens intently, his mind racing through potential solutions. "I have an experimental treatment," Edward announces, his voice cutting through the din. "A combination of Earth antibiotics and a genetically modified human immune booster. With your permission, I'd like to administer it to this patient." The Daxamite Medical Board convenes hastily, their debate fierce but brief. With no other options, they grant Edward permission. He rushes to the hospital's lab, working tirelessly to adapt the treatment for Daxamite physiology. Time slips away as he modifies the formula, acutely aware that every second could mean the difference between life and death for Kira and billions like her. Returning to Kira's bedside, Edward prepares the intravenous line with practiced efficiency. He inserts the needle into her arm, the pale purple fluid flowing into her veins. Edward holds his breath, watching Kira's vital signs for any change. Minutes stretch into hours as he maintains his vigil, hope warring with fear in his chest. A flicker of movement catches Edward's eye. Kira's eyelids flutter, then open fully. Her gaze, clouded by illness moments ago, now shines with newfound clarity. Their eyes lock, an instant connection forming across the gulf of species and stars. The ward erupts in commotion as news of Kira's recovery spreads. Daxamite officials and medical staff swarm around them, their voices a mixture of disbelief and joy. Edward barely notices, his focus solely on Kira's improving condition. A priority communication from the Galactic Council interrupts the celebration. They demand immediate access to Earth's medical knowledge, seeing it as the key to ending the plague crisis. Edward finds himself at the center of a political storm, pulled between human and alien authorities eager to distribute the treatment widely. "We need more testing," Edward insists, his voice firm despite the pressure. "We must ensure it's safe and effective for mass distribution. One success doesn't guarantee it will work for everyone." As the debate rages around them, Edward and Kira share a moment of quiet understanding. In this alien hospital, on a world ravaged by disease, hope blooms anew. The human doctor and his Daxamite patient stand at the threshold of a new era, one where Earth's simple medicines might just save the galaxy. The ward's celebratory atmosphere quickly dissipated as the gravity of the situation set in. Edward's calm unit chimed insistently, displaying an urgent message from the Galactic Council. He glanced at Kira, her vibrant eyes now tinged with concern, before addressing the crowded room. "The Council demands immediate access to our medical knowledge," Edward announced, his voice steady despite the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "They see it as the key to ending this crisis." A cacophony of voices erupted around him, Daxamite officials clamoring for immediate distribution of the treatment. Edward raised his hands, silencing the room. We need more testing, he insisted, meeting the gaze of each official in turn. One success doesn't guarantee universal efficacy or safety. We must proceed with caution. As the debate intensified, Edward felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to find Kira sitting up in her bed, her strength visibly returning with each passing moment. "Dr. Harris is right," she said, her melodious voice carrying across the ward. "I may be recovering, but we can't risk the lives of billions on a single case." The Daxamite officials grudgingly conceded, agreeing to allow further testing before widespread distribution. As they filed out of the ward, Edward returned to Kira's bedside, running another series of diagnostic scans. "Your recovery is progressing remarkably," he murmured, studying the results. "How do you feel?" Kira flexed her fingers, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Like I've been given a second chance at life," she replied, her eyes meeting Edward's. "Thanks to you." Over the next few days, Edward found himself spending increasingly more time with Kira. He told himself it was necessary to monitor her recovery closely, but he couldn't deny the growing attraction he felt towards her. Her quick wit and keen intellect challenged him, and her resilience in the face of near death inspired him. As Kira regained her strength, she began assisting Edward in his work. Her intimate knowledge of Daxamite physiology proved invaluable in refining the treatment. Together, they made rapid progress, their collaborative efforts yielding a more stable version of the cure. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Human and Daxamite officials alike watched their interactions with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Whispers of an interspecies romance circulated through the hospital, adding another layer of complexity to an already tense situation. One evening, as Edward and Kira pored over the latest test results, alarms blared throughout the hospital. Security feeds flickered to life, showing a group of desperate Daxamites forcing their way into the building. "We have to secure the treatment," Edward said, hastily gathering vials of the experimental cure. Kira nodded, her face set with willpower. "This way," she said, leading him towards a hidden storage area. "We can dash." Her words were cut short as the door burst open. A tall, imposing Daxamite strode in, flanked by several others. His eyes locked onto the vials in Edward's hands. "Hand over the cure," he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "Now!" Edward stepped forward, shielding Kira with his body. "We can't do that," he said firmly. "It's not ready for mass distribution. The risks dash." The leader's hand shot out, grabbing Edward by the throat. "I am Zoran," he snarled, "and I will not watch my people die while you hoard the cure." Kira sprang into action, her recent brush with death forgotten. She feinted left, then darted right, using her knowledge of the hospital's layout to her advantage. In the confusion, she managed to snatch the vials from Edward's hand and slip them into a hidden compartment. Zoran, enraged, tightened his grip on Edward. "Return the cure or the human dies," he threatened. Kira's mind raced, assessing their options. She caught Edward's eye, saw the trust there, and made her decision. With a swift movement, she activated the emergency quarantine protocol. Containment fields sprang to life, separating Zoran from his followers. "Listen to me," Kira said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was dying days ago. This man, this human, saved my life. But the treatment isn't ready for everyone. Give us time to perfect it, to ensure it won't harm more than it helps." Her words seemed to penetrate Zoran's desperation. His grip on Edward loosened, and the human doctor gasped for air. The tense standoff stretched for several long moments before Zoran finally stepped back. "2 days," he growled. "You have 2 days to prove you're not lying. After that, we take the cure by force if necessary." As Zoran and his followers were escorted out by security, Edward turned to Kira, rubbing his bruised throat. "That was incredible," he said hoarsely. "You saved both our lives and the treatment." Kira smiled wryly. "We save each other," she replied, her hand finding his. "Now, let's make sure we can save everyone else too." In the aftermath of the raid, Edward made a decision. He approached the Daxamite Medical Board with a proposal for a controlled trial of the treatment on a larger group of infected individuals. To his surprise and relief, they agreed, seeing it as a necessary step towards widespread distribution. As Edward and Kira prepared for this crucial phase of testing, their relationship continued to deepen. Long hours in the lab gave way to shared meals and quiet conversations. They found themselves navigating not just the complexities of interspecies medicine, but also the uncharted territory of their growing feelings for each other. Unbeknownst to them, their success had caught the attention of rival alien factions. In shadowy corners of the galaxy, plans were being made to acquire Earth's medical breakthrough by any means necessary. As Edward and Kira stood on the brink of a new phase in their fight against the plague, unseen forces were aligning against them, setting the stage for challenges that would test not only their medical skills, but also the strength of their bond. The tension in the hospital eased slightly as Edward and Kira focused on their next challenge, the controlled trial of the Earth-based treatment. They converted a wing of the hospital into a specialized testing area, equipping it with advanced monitoring systems and establishing strict protocols for patient care. As the trial began, Edward and Kira moved from bed to bed, administering the treatment with practiced efficiency. The familiar routine of checking vital signs, adjusting dosages, and recording data provided a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos of the past few days. "Patient 17 is showing improved lung function," Kira noted, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. "Oxygen saturation up 12% since treatment began." Edward nodded, his eyes scanning the readouts. "Excellent. Let's increase the dosage for patient 22 by 5% and monitor for any changes." Their synchronicity was evident as they worked, anticipating each other's needs and movements. In the quiet moments between rounds, they found themselves drawn into conversation, their professional collaboration deepening into something more personal. "Tell me about Earth," Kira said one evening as they took a brief respite. "What's it like to live on a world with so much water?" Edward's eyes lit up as he described the oceans and forests of his home planet. Kira listened intently, her curiosity evident in her questions about human customs and daily life. In turn, she shared stories of Daxamite culture, their advanced technology, and the rich history of her people. As days passed, the results of the trial became increasingly promising. Patients who had been on the brink of death now sat up in their beds, their skin regaining its vibrant purple hue. The atmosphere in the hospital shifted from despair to cautious optimism. "We're making real progress," Edward said, reviewing the latest data with Kira. "If this trend continues, we could be ready for wider distribution within weeks." Kira's reply was cut short by a commotion outside the treatment area. They rushed to investigate, finding a group of unfamiliar medical staff attempting to access the secure storage unit containing the treatment vials. "Authorized personnel only," Kira said firmly, stepping between the group and the storage unit. "I'll need to see your credentials." The leader of the group, a tall, lean alien with piercing eyes, smoothly produced a set of identification cards. "We're here to assist with inventory," he said, his voice oddly melodious. "Council orders." Edward studied the credentials, a nagging sense of unease growing in his gut. Something about the group's body language set off warning bells in his mind. He exchanged a glance with Kira, seeing his own suspicion mirrored in her eyes. "I'm afraid we'll need to verify these with hospital security," Edward said, keeping his tone neutral. "Standard procedure for access to restricted areas." The group's leader, Vex, according to his identification, smiled thinly. "Of course. We'll wait here." As Edward moved to contact security, alarms blared throughout the hospital wing. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in an eerie glow. Containment breach in Sector 7. A computerized voice announced. All personnel report to emergency stations. Chaos erupted as medical staff rushed to secure patients and equipment. In the confusion, Edward lost sight of Vex and his team. He grabbed Kira's arm, pulling her close. "Those weren't real medical staff," he said urgently. "We need to secure the treatment and research data. Now." They sprinted towards the secure storage unit, hearts pounding. As they rounded a corner, they collided with a familiar figure, Zoran, the Daxamite leader who had previously threatened them. "Dr. Harris, Kira," Zoran said, his voice filled with unexpected warmth. "I've been looking for you. We have a situation." Edward tensed, ready for another confrontation, but Zoran raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I've seen the results of your work," Zoran continued. "You were right to be cautious. I'm here to help protect the cure and maintain order." Before they could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the direction of the storage unit. Edward, Kira, and Zoran exchanged a look of understanding before rushing towards the noise. They arrived to find Vex and his team attempting to breach the reinforced doors of the storage unit. Alarms blared as the security systems engaged, locking down the entire wing. "Stop!" Edward shouted, his voice carrying over the cacophony. "You don't understand the complexity of the treatment. Improper handling could render it useless or even dangerous." Vex turned, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "Oh, we understand perfectly, Doctor. That's exactly why we're here." As tension mounted in the confined space, a new complication arose. One of the trial patients stumbled into the corridor, his skin mottled with an unfamiliar pattern. "Help!" the Daxamite gasped, collapsing to the floor. "Something's wrong." Edward's medical instincts kicked in, momentarily overriding the immediacy of the security threat. He knelt beside the patient, quickly assessing his condition. "Kira, we have unexpected side effects," he said urgently. "We need to review the treatment data immediately." Caught between the pressing medical emergency and the imminent threat of the mercenaries, Edward, Kira, and Zoran found themselves in an impossible situation. The fate of the cure, the Daxamite civilization, and their own lives hung in the balance as alarms continued to blare and the lockdown tightened its grip on the hospital wing. Edward's mind raced, torn between the immediate threat of the mercenaries and the urgent medical crisis unfolding before him. He locked eyes with Kira, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, Kira stepped towards the storage unit, while Edward focused on the ailing patient. "Zoran, help me with him," Edward commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. As they tended to the patient, Kira's fingers flew across the security panel, her intimate knowledge of the hospital systems allowing her to quickly activate additional safety protocols. The storage unit's reinforced doors glowed with an intensified energy field, further securing the precious vials within. Vex snarled in frustration, his team's efforts to breach the storage unit now rendered futile. He turned his attention to Edward, eyes narrowing dangerously. "You're making a mistake, Doctor. There are forces at play here beyond your comprehension." Edward ignored the threat, his focus entirely on the patient before him. The Daxamite skin had taken on a mottled, iridescent sheen, unlike anything he'd seen before. "Kira, I need the latest treatment data. Now!" Kira nodded, her fingers already dancing across a nearby console. As she worked, she caught Zoran's eye. "We need a distraction," she whispered urgently. Zoran understood immediately. With a subtle nod, he straightened to his full height, addressing Vex and his team. "You dare threaten our people's salvation?" he boomed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "I, Zoran, Protector Daxam, will not stand for this." As Vex's attention shifted to Zoran, Kira seized a moment. She accessed the hospital's environmental controls, quietly initiating a program she and Edward had developed as a contingency plan. Within seconds, a fine mist began to seep from the ventilation system. Edward, catching on to their plan, positioned himself between the mercenaries and the patient, shielding him from view. "Whatever you're after, it's not worth the lives you're risking," he said, stalling for time. Vex took a menacing step forward, but his movements were already becoming sluggish. What have you done?" he slurred, his eyes growing unfocused. One by one, Vex and his team swayed on their feet before collapsing to the ground, overcome by the fast-acting sedative gas tailored to their alien physiology. As the last mercenary fell, Edward allowed himself a moment of relief before returning his attention to the patient. "Kira, what do we have?" he asked urgently. She appeared at his side, holographic data scrolling before her eyes. "There's a genetic variation in a small percentage of daxamites," she reported. "It's causing an overreaction to the Earth-based components of the treatment." Edward's mind whirred with possibilities. "We need to modify the formula. But first, we need to stabilize him." As they worked to treat the patient, alarms continued to blare throughout the hospital. The lockdown had effectively contained the situation, but it also meant they were isolated from additional help. Hours passed in a blur of intense focus and medical precision. Edward and Kira moved seamlessly between patients, adjusting treatments and monitoring vital signs. Zarkon proved an invaluable assistant, his strength and calm presence a steadying influence in the chaotic ward. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to color the sky outside, the immediate crisis passed. The affected patients were stabilized, and the sedated mercenaries were securely contained. Edward leaned against the wall, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Kira joined him, her shoulder brushing against his in a gesture of silent support. "We did it," she said softly. He managed a tired smile. "For now. But we've got a long way to go." Before Kira could respond, the main doors to the ward slid open with a hiss. A team of multi-species peacekeepers strode in, led by a tall, stern-looking alien with metallic blue skin. "I am Commander Thrix," the alien announced, his voice resonating with authority. "By order of the Galactic Council, this facility is now under our protection and supervision." Edward straightened, fatigue forgotten in the face of this new development. "I'm Dr. Edward Harris. We have patients here who need dash." Thrix cut him off with a raised hand. "Your work will continue, Doctor, under our watchful eye. The attempted theft of your formula has raised concerns at the highest levels." As Thrix's team spread out through the ward, Edward and Kira exchanged worried glances. Their already complex situation had just become infinitely more complicated. In the days that followed, Edward and Kira found themselves working under the constant scrutiny of Thrix and his peacekeepers. The pressure to refine the treatment for the genetically variant daxamites added to their already heavy workload. One evening, as they pored over genetic sequencing data, Kira noticed Edward rubbing his temples, a sure sign of his growing frustration. "We're missing something," he muttered. "There's a pattern here. I can feel it." Kira leaned in, her eyes scanning the holographic display. "What if we approach it from a different angle? Instead of trying to suppress the overreaction, what if we harness it?" Edward's eyes widened as he considered the possibility. "You might be onto something, if we could channel that heightened response." Their excitement was palpable as they dove back into their work, unaware that their breakthrough was about to open up a whole new realm of possibilities and complications. Dangers. As Edward and Kira delved deeper into their research, the implications of their discovery began to unfold with staggering clarity. "Edward, look at this," Kira said, her voice tinged with awe. She projected a holographic display of cellular activity, showing the accelerated regeneration in the genetically variant daxamites. The modified cure isn't just healing them. It's enhancing their natural regenerative abilities to an unprecedented level. Edward leaned in, his eyes widening as he absorbed the data. This goes beyond anything we initially anticipated. The potential applications are groundbreaking, Kira finished, meeting his gaze with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Their moment of shared discovery was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Thrix, his metallic blue skin gleaming under the harsh laboratory lights. "Dr. Harris, Kira," he said, his tone grave. "The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. Your findings have caused quite a stir." In the days that followed, the Daxamite homeworld became a hub of frenzied activity. Spacecraft from various alien species descended upon the planet, carrying diplomats, scientists, and observers eager to witness the unfolding events firsthand. Amidst the growing political storm, Edward and Kira worked tirelessly to refine the treatment for the remaining infected Daxamites. The hospital administration, recognizing the importance of their work, allocated a new research facility within the complex. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, allowing them to delve deeper into the mysteries of the regenerative properties they had unlocked. As they worked side by side, the bond between Edward and Kira deepened. Long nights poring over data led to shared meals, stolen glances, and brief moments of respite where they found solace in each other's company. One evening, as they took a rare break on a balcony overlooking the city, Edward found himself lost in the way the fading sunlight played across Kira's features. She turned, catching his gaze, and smiled softly. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "I'm thinking about how, in the midst of all this chaos, I've found something. Someone I never expected." Kira intertwined her fingers with his, her touch sending a warmth through his body. "Edward, I dash." Their moment was shattered by the sharp ping of Edward's communication device. He reluctantly pulled away, activating the holographic display. "Dr. Harris," a stern voice rang out. "This is Ambassador Marcus Steele. My team and I have just arrived from Earth. We need to meet immediately." The arrival of the human diplomatic team added a new layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Ambassador Steele, a tall man with piercing eyes and an air of authority, wasted no time in asserting his presence. "Dr. Harris," Steele said, his handshake firm as he met Edward in the hospital's conference room, "your work here has attracted significant attention back home. We're here to ensure that Earth's interests are properly represented in these delicate negotiations." Edward felt a knot forming in his stomach as Steele's gaze flickered to Kira, who stood by his side. The ambassador's smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed her. "And you must be Kira. Your contribution to this breakthrough is noted." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Steele viewed the situation primarily as a means to advance Earth's standing in galactic affairs. He spoke of leveraging the cure and the regenerative technology for political gain, with little regard for the ethical implications or the immediate needs of the Daxamite population. "Dr. Harris," Steele said, pulling Edward aside as the meeting concluded, "I hope you understand the importance of your role here. It's crucial that you focus on advancing human interests. Your personal entanglements shouldn't cloud your judgment." Edward bristled at the implication. "Ambassador, my priority is saving lives and advancing medical science. That transcends any single species' interests." Steele's eyes narrowed. "Just remember where your loyalty should lie, Doctor." As Edward watched the ambassador leave, he felt the weight of conflicting responsibilities settling on his shoulders. He turned to find Kira watching him, concern etched on her face. "Edward, what did he say to you?" Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Security personnel rushed past them, their weapons at the ready. "Attention all staff." A voice rang out over the intercom. "We have a security breach in Sector 3. This is not a drill. Implement lockdown procedures immediately." Edward and Kira exchanged a look of grit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they rushed towards the source of the disturbance, the future of their work, their relationship, and potentially the entire galaxy hung in the balance. Edward and Kira raced towards Sector 3, their footsteps echoing through the suddenly emptied corridors. As they approached the breach site, they encountered a scene of chaos. Security personnel were engaged in a firefight with a group of masked intruders wielding advanced weaponry. "We need to secure the research data," Edward shouted over the din of energy blasts and alarms. Kira nodded, her eyes scanning the area for a path through the melee. "This way," she called, grabbing Edward's hand and pulling him towards a side corridor. They sprinted through the twisting hallways of the facility, the sounds of battle fading behind them. As they rounded a corner, they collided with a tall, imposing figure. Edward stumbled back, his heart racing as he recognized the metallic blue skin and stern features of Commander Thrix. "Dr. Harris, Kira." Thrix's resonant voice cut through the cacophony of alarms. "The situation is under control. The intruders have been subdued." Edward's relief was short-lived as he noticed the grim set of Thrix's jaw. "Commander, what's wrong?" "The attack was a diversion," Thrix replied, his eyes narrowing. "While our forces were occupied here, a ship breached our orbital defenses. It's heading for the surface now." Before Edward could respond, a tremor shook the building. The lights flickered, and a low rumble echoed through the corridors. "That wasn't weapons fire," Kira said, her voice tight with concern. "It felt like an impact," Edward finished, his mind racing with possibilities. "Commander, we need to dash." His words were cut off as the facility's communication system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel," a familiar voice rang out. "This is Galactic Overseer Zalthrix. I have assumed control of this operation effective immediately. All staff are to report to their designated assembly areas for further instructions." Edward and Kira exchanged worried glances. The arrival of the Galactic Council's Joint Task Force had been expected, but not like this. "Come," Thrix said, gesturing for them to follow. "We must meet with the Overseer." As they made their way through the facility, Edward noticed the increased presence of multi-species security forces. Unfamiliar uniforms and insignias mingled with the local Daxamite security, creating an atmosphere of tense uncertainty. They entered a large conference room that had been hastily converted into a command center. At its center stood Overseer Zalthrix, a towering figure with iridescent scales and piercing golden eyes. His very presence seemed to dominate the room. "Dr. Harris, Kira." Zalthrix's voice was smooth yet carried an undercurrent of steel. "Your work has attracted the attention of forces beyond this world. The Galactic Council has deemed it necessary to implement stricter protocols for the safety of all involved." Edward felt a chill run down his spine at the Overseer's words. "With all due respect, Overseer, our primary concern is the well-being of the Daxamite people. We can't afford any delays in distributing the cure." Zalthrix's golden eyes locked onto Edward. "Your dedication is admirable, Doctor. However, the scope of this operation has expanded. We will be relocating your research to a new, more secure facility." As if on cue, the door slid open, revealing a team of workers already moving equipment. Edward watched in disbelief as his carefully organized lab was dismantled before his eyes. "This is outrageous," Kira exclaimed, stepping forward. "We're in the middle of critical research. Moving everything now could set us back weeks." "Your concerns are noted," Zalthrix replied coolly. "But this decision is not open to debate. You will be provided with all necessary resources at the new facility." As Edward and Kira were ushered out of the room, they caught sight of a familiar face entering, Ambassador Steele, flanked by a team of human diplomats and scientists. "Dr. Harris," Steele called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm glad to see you're safe. I've brought some additional support for your team. This is Dr. Lydia Burns, one of Earth's leading geneticists. A tall woman with sharp features and calculating eyes stepped forward, extending her hand. "Dr. Harris, it's an honor to meet you. I look forward to contributing to your groundbreaking work." Edward shook her hand automatically, his mind turning from the rapid changes. As they were led away to the new facility, he caught Kira's eye. The concern he saw there mirrored his own. Their work, their relationship, and the fate of the Daxamite people hung in a precarious balance. The new medical complex was a marvel of engineering, a gleaming citadel of advanced technology surrounded by a shimmering force field. As Edward and Kira were escorted through its pristine corridors, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease at the sterile, impersonal atmosphere. "Your new lab is through here," their guide, a stern-faced alien with blue-tinted skin, informed them. "You'll find it's been equipped with the latest in galactic medical technology." As the door slid open, Edward's eyes widened at the array of unfamiliar equipment that filled the space. It was impressive, certainly, but the sight of it only heightened his sense of displacement. "This is quite something," he managed, trying to keep his voice neutral. Kira moved to a nearby console, her fingers hovering over the alien interface. "It'll take some time to familiarize ourselves with all of this," she said, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. Their guide nodded curtly. "You'll be given a full orientation tomorrow. For now, please review the new security protocols on your datapads. Good evening." As the door closed behind him, Edward and Kira found themselves alone for the first time since their arrival. The weight of their new reality settled around them like a heavy cloak. "Edward," Kira began, her voice low, "I don't like this. It feels like we're being pushed out of our own research." Edward ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I know, but we have to be careful. There's too much at stake to risk open defiance." Kira stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "What about us? With all this surveillance, how can we?" Her words trailed off as Edward's gaze darted to the ceiling, where a small red light indicated an active monitoring system. He shook his head subtly, and Kira's shoulders slumped in understanding. As the days passed, Edward and Kira threw themselves into their work, struggling to maintain their progress under the watchful eyes of their new overseers. The presence of Dr. Burns added another layer of complexity to their efforts. While brilliant, she seemed more interested in the potential applications of their research than in its immediate goal of saving Daxamite lives. One evening, as Edward pored over genetic sequencing data, he felt a slight vibration in his pocket. Frowning, he pulled out his personal communicator to find a cryptic message from Kira. "Maintenance Shaft 7B, 2,200 hours." Excitement and apprehension warred within him as he casually made his way to the specified location. He found a small access panel partially concealed behind a storage unit. With a quick glance to ensure he wasn't observed, Edward slipped inside. The narrow shaft was dimly lit by emergency lighting. As he crawled forward, he heard a faint shuffling ahead. Rounding a bend, he came face to face with Kira, her purple skin taking on an almost luminescent quality in the low light. "I found this route by accident," she whispered, a smile playing at her lips. "It's not monitored." Edward felt a rush of warmth as he reached out to touch her face. "Kira, I've missed you." Their moment of intimacy was cut short by a distant sound of footsteps. They froze, hardly daring to breathe as they listened intently. The footsteps faded, but the brief scare served as a stark reminder of their precarious situation. "We should head back," Edward said reluctantly. "But we'll find more opportunities like this. I promise." As they prepared to part ways, Kira gripped Edward's arm. "There's something else," she said, her voice urgent. "I overheard Zarkon talking to one of the security officers. There's a black market operation, trading stolen doses of the cure." Edward's eyes widened at the implications. We need to investigate this. If someone's diverting the cure, it could jeopardize everything we've worked for. Kira nodded, her expression determined. I'll see what else I can find out. Be careful, Edward. With a final, lingering look, they separated, each returning to their quarters through different routes. As Edward lay in his bed that night, his mind raced with the day's events. The stolen cure, the oppressive security, the secret meetings with Kira, it all pointed to a situation spiraling beyond their control. Little did he know that their clandestine investigation would soon lead them into the heart of a conspiracy that threatened not just their work, but the very fabric of galactic society. As dawn broke over the gleaming medical complex, Edward steeled himself for the challenges ahead, unaware of the earth-shattering discoveries that awaited him in the depths of the facility. As Edward entered the lab that morning, he found Kira already hard at work, her brow furrowed in concentration as she pored over genetic sequencing data. "Any progress?" he asked, moving to join her at the workstation. Kira opened her mouth to respond, but her words were cut short by a sudden, violent tremor that shook the entire complex. Alarms blared as the lights flickered ominously. "What's happening?" Edward shouted over the cacophony of sirens and rumbling machinery. Before Kira could answer, the lab doors burst open. Commander Thrix rushed in, his usually stoic face etched with urgency. "Dr. Harris, Kira, we need to evacuate immediately. There's been a security breach in the restricted wing." As they hurried through the corridors, following Thrix's lead, the true scale of the chaos became apparent. Security personnel clashed with masked intruders wielding advanced weaponry. Energy blasts ricocheted off walls, leaving scorch marks in their wake. "This way," Thrix called, gesturing towards a sealed doorway. He quickly input a security code, and the door slid open with a hiss. They found themselves in a dimly lit laboratory, far more secure than their usual workspace. At its center stood a containment unit, its contents obscured by a swirling mist. "What is this place?" Edward asked, his scientific curiosity piqued despite the dire circumstances. Thrix's response was cut short as a deafening explosion rocked the complex. The sealed door they had just passed through buckled inward, and through the smoke and debris stepped a figure Edward recognized with a jolt of dread. Vex, the notorious black market dealer. "I'll take that, thank you," Vex sneered, gesturing towards the containment unit with his weapon. In that moment, several things happened at once. Thrix lunged at Vex. Kira moved to protect the containment unit, and Edward found himself caught in the middle of the ensuing struggle. As they grappled, Vex's weapon discharged, striking the containment unit. Time seemed to slow as Edward watched in horror. The unit's protective casing shattered, releasing a cloud of shimmering particles. Kira, standing closest to the unit, was engulfed in the strange mist. "No!" Edward cried out, rushing to her side as she collapsed to the floor. Thrix, having subdued Vex, quickly sealed off the room to prevent the substance from spreading further. "That was a concentrated dose of the experimental super-soldier serum," he explained grimly. "We need to stabilize her immediately." Edward's mind raced as he assessed Kira's rapidly deteriorating condition. Her purple skin began to shift and ripple, muscles bulging and contracting of their own accord. Her eyes, when they flickered open, showed pupils dilated to an impossible degree. Drawing on his expertise in human and Daxamite biology, Edward sprang into action. "I need a stabilizing agent," he barked at Thrix. "Something that combines elements from the Earth-based cure and Daxamite genetic material." As Thrix rushed to gather the necessary components, Edward worked feverishly to synthesize a stabilizer that could counteract the serum's effects. Time seemed to stretch as he mixed compounds and adjusted ratios, all while monitoring Kira's increasingly volatile condition. Finally, with a stabilizing agent prepared, Edward administered it to Kira. Her violent convulsions began to subside, but the physical changes didn't fully revert. Her skin continued to shift in mesmerizing patterns, and her muscles retained their enhanced definition. "Kira," Edward called softly, cradling her head in his lap. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and Edward gasped at the intensity of her gaze. "Edward," she whispered, her voice carrying a new resonance. "What's happening to me?" Before he could respond, the door to the lab slid open once more. Galactic Overseer Zalfric strode in, his imposing figure filling the room with an aura of authority. His golden eyes narrowed as they took in the scene before him. "Explain," he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. As Edward began to recount the events that had transpired, he couldn't help but notice the calculating look in Zalfric's eyes as they lingered on Kira's transformed form. The implications of what had occurred here, he realized, would reach far beyond this room, potentially reshaping the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. With Kira's condition stabilized but still precarious, and the consequences of the serum's exposure yet to be fully understood, Edward knew that the challenges they faced were only beginning. As he helped Kira to her feet, supporting her still unsteady form, he steeled himself for the trials that lay ahead. As he met Kira's gaze, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as the medical complex buzzed with renewed urgency. Edward and Kira found themselves at the center of a storm of scientific inquiry and political maneuvering. Dr. Lydia Burns, in particular, seemed to hover constantly at the edges of their work, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Kira's transformation. One morning, as Edward was reviewing data on Kira's latest blood samples, Dr. Burns approached his workstation. "Dr. Harris," she began, her tone deceptively casual, "I've been analyzing the results of our latest tests on Kira's physiology. The potential here is extraordinary." Edward tensed, sensing the direction of the conversation. "We're making progress, certainly," he replied cautiously. Dr. Burns leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Progress? This is a revolution waiting to happen. With Kira's enhanced body acting as a living incubator for the cure, we could increase production tenfold, maybe even 100-fold. Kira is a person, not a production facility," Edward said firmly, struggling to keep his voice level. Of course, Dr. Burns backpedaled smoothly. "But surely you see the potential here. I've drafted a proposal for a series of experiments that could help us fully understand and utilize Kira's new abilities." Before Edward could respond, the lab door slid open and Ambassador Steele strode in, his face a mask of diplomatic concern. "Dr. Harris, a word, if you please." Edward excused himself, following the ambassador to a quiet corner of the lab. Steele's expression grew serious as he spoke in hushed tones. "The situation here is becoming increasingly volatile. Earth is concerned about the security of our scientific assets." "What are you suggesting?" Edward asked, though he already suspected the answer. "We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you and Kira returned to Earth for the time being. For your own protection, of course." Edward's eyes sharp. "With all due respect, Ambassador, our work is here. The Daxamites need us." "Need you? Or need your test subject?" Steele's eyes flickered towards Kira, who was engrossed in her work across the lab. "She's not a test subject," Edward said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's my partner, and we're staying here to complete our mission." As Steele opened his mouth to argue further, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Security personnel rushed past the lab, their weapons drawn. "What's happening?" Edward demanded, hurrying to Kira's side. Commander Thrix burst into the lab, his face grim. "There's been an attack on the public forum. Krell's extremists have struck again." Without hesitation, Edward and Kira followed Thrix to the complex's security center. Monitors displayed chaos in the streets of the capital city. In the center of the turmoil stood Zoran, attempting to calm the panicked crowd as Krell's followers advanced, weapons raised. "We have to do something," Kira said, her eyes fixed on the unfolding disaster. Edward turned to her, concern etched on his face. "Kira, it's too dangerous. Your abilities are still unstable." But Kira was already moving, her body shimmering with awe-inspiring energy. "I can help. I have to try." Before anyone could stop her, Kira had slipped past the security cordon and out into the streets. Edward watched in a mixture of awe and terror as she approached the conflict zone. Krell's followers, seeing her approach, turned their weapons towards her. What happened next was both breathtaking and horrifying. Kira's body seemed to pulse with energy, and in a burst of power, she sent Krell's attackers flying backward. But the display of force didn't stop there. The ground beneath her feet cracked, buildings trembled, and for a moment, it seemed as if Kira might lose control entirely. With a supreme effort of will, Kira managed to rein in her powers, but the damage was done. The crowd, already panicked, now looked at her with a mixture of fear and wonder. In the aftermath of the incident, Edward found himself facing Galactic Overseer Zalthrix, whose golden eyes burned with awe-inspiring fury. "This situation has become untenable," Zalthrix declared. "Until we can be certain of her stability, Kira must be contained." Edward's protest fell on deaf ears as Kira was escorted to a heavily guarded suite within the medical complex. As the door sealed behind her, Edward felt a wave of desperation wash over him. He knew he had to find a way to continue their work and protect Kira at any expense. That night, as the complex settled into an uneasy quiet, Edward put his plan into motion. Using his knowledge of the facility's systems and the secret tunnels they had discovered during their investigation of the smuggling ring, he made his way to Kira's containment suite. "We don't have much time," he whispered as Kira joined him in the dimly lit passage. "I've set up a lab in one of the abandoned sections of the tunnel network. We can continue our work there, away from prying eyes." As they navigated the winding tunnels, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something much larger than they had ever anticipated. The cure, Kira's transformation, the political machinations swirling around them, it all seemed to be building towards a climax that would reshape not just the fate of the Daxamites, but potentially the entire galaxy. Little did they know that even as they worked in secret, new forces were aligning against them. Dr. Burns' suspicions were growing. Krell's extremists were planning their next move, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, an unknown alien species had turned its attention to the small planet and the remarkable power growing within it. As Edward and Kira settled into their clandestine lab, the weight of their responsibility pressed down upon them. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but they were determined to see their mission through, no matter the consequences. Cost. As Edward and Kira delved deeper into their clandestine research, the delicate balance of power on Daxam was about to be shattered. A deafening roar filled the sky, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. Edward and Kira exchanged alarmed glances as they rushed to a view screen in their hidden lab. What they saw made their hearts race. A massive alien vessel had entered Daxam's orbit, dwarfing the Galactic Council ships that hovered nearby. "What is that?" Kira breathed, her enhanced vision picking up details Edward could barely discern. Before Edward could respond, their communication system crackled to life. Commander Thrix's voice, tight with tension, filled the room. "Dr. Harris, Kira, you need to return to the surface immediately. We have a situation." Within minutes, they found themselves in a hastily convened meeting with Daxam's leadership, Earth's representatives, and members of the Galactic Council. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension as Overseer Zalthrix addressed the group. "The aliens call themselves the Zarkon," he said, his golden eyes narrowed. "They've demanded an immediate meeting with all of us." As they made their way to the designated meeting point, Edward couldn't help but notice the fear etched on the faces of Daxam's citizens. The Zarkon ship loomed overhead, a constant reminder of the potential threat they faced. The meeting itself was a tense affair. The Zarkon representatives, tall, imposing figures with iridescent skin, wasted no time in revealing their true intentions. "We have been observing your planet," the Zarkon leader stated, its multi-tone voice sending shivers down Edward's spine. "The development of your plague cure and the enhancement of the one you call Kira have not gone unnoticed. We see this as a potential threat to our dominance in this sector." The room erupted in murmurs, quickly silenced by the Zarkon's next words. "Our demand is simple. Hand over the enhanced individual and all research related to the super-soldier serum, or face annihilation." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Edward instinctively moved closer to Kira, his mind racing to find a solution. To everyone's surprise, it was Ambassador Steele who spoke first. "This is unacceptable," he declared, locking eyes with Overseer Zalthrix and Zoran. "We cannot and will not comply with these demands." For once, the divided factions found themselves in agreement. A plan was quickly formulated to evacuate key personnel, including Edward and Kira, to a hidden facility deep within Daxam's crust. As they prepared to leave, alarms blared throughout the complex. Commander Thrix's voice came over the comm system, urgent and strained. "Krell's extremists are attacking. They're trying to destroy the cure and eliminate all off-worlders." Chaos erupted as security forces engaged the attackers. In the confusion, Edward and Kira became separated from their escort. They found themselves alone in the winding corridors of the medical complex, the sounds of battle echoing around them. "This way," Kira said, her enhanced senses guiding them through the maze-like structure. They turned a corner and came face-to-face with a group of Krell's followers, weapons raised. What happened next was a blur of motion and power. Kira moved with impossible speed, her body shimmering with energy. In seconds, the attackers were subdued, lying unconscious at her feet. Edward stared in awe, realizing just how much Kira's abilities had grown. A group of injured medical staff huddled nearby, having witnessed Kira's display of power. Their expressions of fear slowly transformed into ones of wonder and gratitude. "Thank you," one of them said, voice filled with newfound respect. "You saved us." As they helped the injured to safety, Edward noticed a shift in the way the Daxamites looked at Kira. The fear and suspicion were being replaced by something else. Hope. Their moment of respite was short-lived. A new alarm sounded, its pitch higher and more urgent than before. Edward's blood ran cold as he recognized the significance. "The unstable compound alarm," he muttered. "But how?" They raced towards the source of the danger, finding Dr. Burns frantically trying to contain a violently reacting substance. "I was trying to replicate Kira's physiology," she confessed, panic evident in her voice. "It's unstable. It could destroy the entire complex." Edward and Kira shared a determined look. Without a word, they sprang into action, their movements perfectly synchronized. Edward's scientific knowledge combined with Kira's enhanced abilities as they worked to neutralize the compound. Time seemed to stretch as they fought to contain the reaction. Sweat beaded on Edward's brow as he made rapid calculations, guiding Kira's actions. Finally, with a last burst of energy from Kira, the compound stabilized. As the immediate danger passed, they found themselves surrounded by grateful staff and security personnel. Commander Thrix approached, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "We need to move now," he said. "The evacuation plan is in motion." Edward and Kira were quickly ushered to a transport, joining a select group of scientists and political leaders. As they descended into the depths of Daxam, Edward couldn't help but marvel at the hidden facility that would be their new base of operations. Built into an ancient Daxamite ruin, the bunker was a marvel of engineering and secrecy. Advanced research equipment lined the walls, promising new avenues for their work. As they settled into their new surroundings, Edward and Kira found a moment of relative calm. The events of the past few hours burdened immensely on them, drawing them closer together. "Edward," Kira said softly, her enhanced senses picking up the rapid beating of his heart. "What happens now?" He met her gaze, acutely aware of the intensity of her presence. "We keep working," he replied, his voice low. "We find a way to protect Daxam, to stop the Zarkon." Their faces drew closer, the tension between them palpable. Just as their lips were about to meet, an urgent message flashed across the facility's main screen. "Incoming transmission," the computer announced. "Origin unknown." As they turned to face this new development, Edward and Kira knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The fate of not just Daxam, but potentially the entire galaxy, rested in their hands. Hands. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited for the mysterious transmission to unfold. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of an unfamiliar alien species. Its features were sharp and angular, with iridescent skin that seemed to shift colors as it moved. The being's eyes, deep and penetrating, scanned the room before settling on Edward and Kira. "Greetings, inhabitants of Daxam," the alien said, its voice a melodious blend of tones. "I am Zarthol, emissary of the Zarkon Empire. We have intercepted your communications and tracked your movements to this facility. Surrender now, and we may yet show mercy." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The tremor started as a gentle vibration, but quickly escalated into violent shaking that threatened to topple equipment and sent loose objects clattering to the floor. "They've begun their assault," Commander Thrix shouted over the din, his face grim with drive. Everyone, battle stationed. As if in response to Thrix's command, the ancient facility hummed to life. Hidden panels slid open, revealing an array of advanced defensive systems that had lain dormant for millennia. Zoran's eyes widened in recognition. "These defenses," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "They're from the time of the Cosmic Guardians. Our ancestors built this place to protect Daxam from threats beyond our stars." Edward and Kira exchanged a look of hope. Perhaps they stood a chance after all. But there was no time to marvel at the ancient technology. The Zarkon forces were already breaching the outer defenses, their energy weapons leaving scorch marks on the reinforced walls. As the battle raged above, Edward and Kira redoubled their efforts in the makeshift lab. Their hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting settings and analyzing data at a frantic pace. "Edward, look at this," Kira said, her enhanced vision picking up details in the cellular structure that would have been invisible to normal eyes. "My body is producing a new compound. It's like the cure, but different." Edward leaned in, his scientific curiosity piqued despite the dire circumstances. "It's weaponized," he muttered, realization dawning on his face. "Kira, your body has adapted the cure into a form that can incapacitate the Zarkon without killing them." Their excitement was short-lived as Dr. Burns burst into the lab, her face streaked with sweat and grime. "We're running out of time," she panted. "The Zarkon are breaking through faster than we anticipated." Edward's mind raced, calculating possibilities and potential outcomes. "We might have a solution," he said, quickly explaining their discovery to Dr. Burns. As they discussed the implications, Ambassador Steele entered the room, his usual composure shaken. "I've made contact with Earth," he announced. "Admiral Burns is mobilizing our fleet, but they won't arrive in time to stop the initial invasion." The weight of their situation pressed down on the group. Kira stepped forward, her eyes blazing with drive. "I can do it," she said. "My body can produce enough of the compound to repel the Zarkon." Edward's heart clenched at her words. "Kira, no," he protested. "The strain on your system would be too great. It could kill you." Before Kira could respond, Another violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared as the defensive systems struggled to repel the invaders. "We're out of options," Commander Thrix's voice crackled over the intercom. "They've breached the inner defenses. We need a solution now." In that moment of crisis, an unexpected voice cut through the chaos. "We can help," Krell said, stepping forward with a small group of his followers. They had been captured during the earlier attack and brought to the bunker for containment. Zoran eyed them warily but recognized the opportunity for unity. "Very well," he said, nodding to Thrix. "Assign them to reinforce our weakening perimeter." As Krell and his group moved to join the defense, Dr. Burns's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "Wait," she called out. "I have an idea. We can use the ancient Daxamite technology to amplify the effects of Kira's compound. It's risky, but it could neutralize the Zarkon threat without placing the entire burden on Kira." Edward looked at Kira, torn between his duty to protect the planet and his love for her. Kira met his gaze, her decision already made. "We have to try," she said softly. With renewed purpose, the team sprang into action. Edward and Dr. Burns worked feverishly to integrate Kira's unique physiology with the ancient Daxamite systems, while Kira prepared herself for the ordeal ahead. The sounds of battle grew closer as the Zarkon pushed deeper into the facility. Krell and his followers fought alongside the defenders, their previous animosity forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Just as the integration process neared completion, a massive explosion rocked the bunker. Zarkon troops poured into the chamber, their weapons charged and ready to fire. Kira's body began to glow with an otherworldly energy as the ancient technology interfaced with her enhanced physiology. Edward's hand hovered over the final activation switch, his eyes locked with Kira's. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The fate of Daxam, Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy hung in the balance. With a silent prayer, Edward pressed the switch. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from Kira, engulfing the room and radiating outward through the facility. The wave swept across the planet's surface, its effects immediate and dramatic. As the light faded, Edward blinked, his vision slowly returning. The Zarkon soldiers lay incapacitated on the ground, their bodies racked with violent tremors. Outside, the invasion force was in full retreat, their once mighty armada now struggling to escape Daxam's atmosphere. But as the immediate threat subsided, a new concern arose. The amplification process had triggered unexpected changes in Daxam's atmosphere. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and seismic activity increased across the planet. Edward rushed to Kira's side, cradling her weakened form. As she opened her eyes, a weak smile played across her lips. They had survived, but at what cost? As the group emerged from the bunker to survey the aftermath, they knew their challenges were a long way to go. The planet's environment was in flux, and the humiliated Zarkon would surely seek revenge. Edward held Kira close, their bond a beacon of hope in the uncertain future that lay ahead. Together, they would face whatever came next, united in their perseverance to protect Daxam and forge a new path for humans, Daxamites, and the wider galactic community. As they stepped out of the bunker and into the harsh light of day. The sight that greeted them was one of devastation. Where once lush forests and sprawling cities stood, now lay a landscape ravaged by the aftermath of their high-stakes endeavor. Massive storm clouds roiled overhead, their dark masses occasionally lit by flashes of lightning. The air felt heavy and charged, making it difficult to breathe. Edward's scientific mind immediately began cataloging the changes. "The atmospheric composition has been drastically altered," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to set up monitoring stations immediately." Kira nodded, her enhanced senses already picking up on subtle changes invisible to the others. "The soil composition is changing rapidly," she added, kneeling to touch the ground. I can feel the minerals shifting beneath my fingers. As they surveyed the damage, Ambassador Steele approached, his face grim. I've just received word from Earth. Admiral Burns is en route with our space fleet. They should be arriving within the day. Edward felt a mix of relief and apprehension at this news. While Earth support would be crucial in the coming days, he couldn't help but worry about the potential complications it might bring. Over the next few hours, a flurry of activity consumed the group. Edward and Dr. Burns worked tirelessly to repurpose salvage technology into atmospheric monitoring stations. Kira, with her enhanced abilities, proved invaluable in this effort, her heightened senses allowing for precise calibration of the delicate instruments. As the first of these stations came online, the data it provided painted a worrying picture. The Cure's interaction with Daxam's atmosphere is causing rapid desertification in some areas, Edward explained to the gathered group. We need to act fast if we want to prevent irreversible damage to the ecosystem. Zarkon, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. There might be a way, he said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. Our ancestors left behind terraforming technology. If we could adapt it to our current needs. Before he could finish, a violent tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. Equipment crashed to the floor as everyone struggled to maintain their balance. As quickly as it had begun, the shaking subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. What was that? Ambassador Steele asked, his usual composure shaken. Zoran's face had gone pale. I fear it's worse than we thought, he said gravely. The Cure may have awakened something deep within Daxam's core, something our ancestors sealed away eons ago. As if in response to his words, the ground began to shake again, more violently this time. In the distance, a massive fissure opened in the earth, releasing a plume of superheated gas into the already turbulent atmosphere. We need to stabilize the core, Edward said, his mind racing through possibilities. Kira, your unique physiology might be the key. If we could modify the Cure to communicate with whatever's down there. Kira nodded, understanding the implication. I'll have to go down there myself, won't I? She asked, her voice steady despite the danger such a mission would entail. Edward wanted to protest, to find another way, but he knew there was no time. The fate of an entire world hung in the balance. We'll need to create a protective suit, he said instead, squeezing Kira's hand. One that can withstand the heat and pressure of the core. As they began preparations for this daring mission, a familiar face approached. It was Krell, looking haggard but determined. We want to help, he said, gesturing to his remaining followers. Whatever our differences, Daxam is our home too. Zoran hesitated for a moment before nodding. We'll need all the help we can get managing the surface conditions, he said. Thank you. As night fell, the storms intensified. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the devastated landscape. In a makeshift lab, Edward and Dr. Burns worked feverishly on Kira's protective suit, each aware that her life would depend on their work. Kira stood at the entrance of the lab, watching Edward with a mix of love and concern. Despite the chaos around them, or perhaps because of it, she felt drawn to him more than ever. As if sensing her gaze, Edward looked up, their eyes meeting across the room. In that moment, with alarms blaring and the ground shaking beneath them, they shared a silent understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The fate of Daxam, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested in their hands. As Edward and Kira stepped out of the bunker, the harsh reality of their situation became even more apparent. The devastated landscape stretched before them, a stark reminder of the challenges they faced. But there was no time to dwell on the destruction. They had a planet to save. In the makeshift lab, Edward and Dr. Burns worked tirelessly on Kira's protective suit. The air was thick with tension as they ran through final checks and adjustments. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the room. No, 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 Edward exclaimed. his fingers flying across the control panel. The suit's internal cooling system is malfunctioning. Dr. Burns leaned in, her brow furrowed. The radiation shielding is compromised too. We can't send Kira down there like this. Kira, watching from the doorway, felt her heart sink. How long will it take to fix? Edward ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. Hours, at least. Maybe more. As they worked to repair the suit, the ground beneath their feet trembled with increasing frequency. Outside, the storms grew more intense, lightning illuminating the darkened sky in brilliant flashes. While Edward and Dr. Burns battled with the suit systems, a new face arrived at the facility. Dr. Zaxlor, a Daxamite geologist with a reputation that preceded him, strode into the lab with purpose. "I have critical information about the planet's core," he announced, his eyes scanning the room. "The entities we've awakened, they're not a threat. They're guardians, created by our ancestors to protect Daxam." This revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the group. Edward looked up from his work, his mind racing with the implications. Guardians? Then why are they causing all this destruction? Dr. Zaxlor shook his head. They're not causing it intentionally. The cure has disrupted the delicate balance they maintain. We need to communicate with them, restore that balance. As the team absorbed this new information, a commotion outside caught their attention. A group of Earth operatives, led by a stern-faced commander, were unloading equipment from a recently arrived shuttle. Ambassador Steele approached them, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What's all this? We weren't expecting additional personnel." The commander handed him a data pad. "Direct orders from Admiral Burns. Sir, we're here to assist with the mission and collect samples for analysis." Edward overheard this exchange and felt a twinge of unease. Something about this didn't sit right, but he pushed the thought aside. They had more pressing concerns. Hours passed as they worked feverishly to repair the suit. Finally, with a sigh of relief, Edward initiated the final diagnostic. "It's ready," he announced, turning to Kira. "Are you sure about this?" Kira nodded, her eyes filled with tenacity. "I have to do this, Edward, for all of us." As Kira donned the suit, Edward, Dr. Zaxlor, and a small team boarded the specially designed drilling vehicle. The Earth operatives insisted on joining them, citing Admiral Burns' orders. The descent into Daxam's depths was a harrowing experience. The vehicle shuddered and groaned as it pushed through layers of unstable crust and mantle. Edward's knuckles were white on the controls, his focus absolute as he navigated the treacherous path. Kira sat beside him, her enhanced senses on high alert. As they delved deeper, she began to experience flashes of vivid imagery, glimpses of Daxam's ancient past and the creation of the Guardians. "Edward," she gasped, her eyes wide. "I can see them. The Guardians. They're beautiful." Edward glanced at her, concern etched on his face. "What do you see?" Before she could respond, the vehicle lurched violently. A massive tremor shook the surrounding rock, and debris began to rain down around them. "Hold on!" Edward shouted, his hands flying over the controls. With expert precision, he maneuvered the vehicle through a narrow gap in the falling rocks, the hull scraping against stone with a screech of metal. As the dust settled, Edward and Kira shared a look of relief and something more, a deepening of their bond forged in the face of danger. The team pressed on, descending further into the planet's core. The sensors began to pick up strange energy signatures, and through the viewport, they caught their first glimpse of the Guardians. Massive crystalline structures pulsed with energy, their forms a mesmerizing blend of geometric precision and organic fluidity. But as the vehicle approached, the Guardians reacted with hostility, lashing out with powerful energy discharges. "Kira, can you communicate with them?" Edward asked, struggling to keep the vehicle stable as another blast rocked it. Kira closed her eyes, concentrating. I can try. She stepped towards the airlock, her hand hovering over the release. Kira, wait, Edward called out, but she had already made her decision. As Kira exited the vehicle in her protective suit, Edward noticed one of the Earth operatives discreetly collecting samples from the surrounding crystals. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he realized the potential consequences of this action. Outside, Kira stood face to face with the awakening Guardians. She reached out with her mind, pushing through the initial resistance until suddenly a connection formed. In that moment, she understood the true nature of Daxam's core and the vital role the Guardians played in maintaining the planet's stability. Inside the vehicle, Edward worked frantically to adjust the modified cure, his mind racing to find a solution that would restore balance without harming the ancient entities. Dr. Zaxlor provided crucial insights, helping to calibrate the cure to work in harmony with Daxam's unique properties. As Kira communicated with the Guardians, she realized the gravity of their situation. The core's instability was reaching a critical point. She turned back to the vehicle, her voice urgent through the comm system. Edward, we need to act now. I have to channel the cure directly into the core's energy network. Edward's heart clenched with fear. Kira, that could kill you. It's the only way, she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. I have to try. As Edward prepared to make the most difficult decision of his life, the fate of Daxam hung in the balance. The Guardians pulsed with increasing intensity. The core trembled on the brink of catastrophe, and Kira stood ready to sacrifice everything to save her world. Adopted world. As her hand hovered over the airlock release, Edward made a split-second decision that would change everything. Wait, he shouted, grabbing a syringe filled with the modified cure. Without hesitation, he plunged it into his arm, wincing as the serum coursed through his veins. Kira's eyes widened in shock. Edward, what have you done? I won't let you face this alone, he said, his voice strained as his body began to change. The transformation was rapid and intense. Edward's muscles tensed and rippled, his senses sharpening to match Kira's enhanced state. He gasped, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of sensory information. I can feel it, he whispered, looking at his hands in awe. The core, the Guardians, everything. Together, they stepped out of the vehicle and into the swirling energy of Daxam's core. The crystalline Guardians loomed before them, pulsing with ancient power. Kira reached out, both physically and mentally, establishing a connection with the entities. Edward followed suit, his newly enhanced mind merging with hers and the Guardians. The experience was overwhelming. Images of Daxam's history flooded their shared consciousness. The creation of the Guardians, the rise and fall of civilizations, the delicate balance maintained over millennia. We need to channel the cure, Kira communicated wordlessly to Edward. Are you ready? He nodded, gripping her hand tightly. As one, they began to direct the flow of the modified cure into the core's energy network. The strain was immediate and intense. Their bodies trembled with effort, sweat beading on their brows despite the protective suits. Inside the vehicle, Dr. Zaxlor monitored their vital signs with growing concern. Their heart rates are off the charts, he muttered. I don't know how long they can sustain this. Suddenly, one of the Earth operatives moved towards a cluster of crystals, a collection device in hand. Dr. Zaxlor's eyes narrowed. Stop! He shouted, lunging at the operative. You'll disrupt the entire process. But it was too late. As the operative's device made contact with the crystal, a surge of energy rippled through the core. Edward and Kira cried out in unison, their linked minds assaulted by the sudden imbalance. The cavern shook violently, crystals shattering and reforming in chaotic patterns. Dr. Zaxlor grappled with the operative, trying to wrest the device from his grasp. Edward, Kira, he called out, you need to contain the energy. Through their pain, The pair heard his words. With a shared thought, they redirected their focus, using their combined abilities to channel the volatile energy. The core erupted in a dazzling display of light and color. Streams of energy arced between the crystalline structures, contained and guided by Edward and Kira's efforts. Their bodies glowed with an otherworldly radiance as they absorbed and redirected the power surging around them. On the surface, Zarkon watched in awe as the raging storms began to subside. The violent tremors that had rocked the planet for hours slowly diminished. "It's working," he breathed, turning to the anxious crowd gathered in the control center. "They're stabilizing the core." Back in the depths, Edward and Kira completed the rebalancing process. As they disconnected from the Guardians, they found themselves linked in a new, profound way. Thoughts and emotions flowed between them effortlessly. Their experiences merged into a shared consciousness. But the strain had taken its toll. As the last of the energy settled, both collapsed to the ground, their bodies pushed beyond their limits. Dr. Zaxlor rushed to their side, barking orders to the remaining team members. "We need to get them out of here now." As they moved Edward and Kira back to the vehicle, a new crisis emerged. The drilling machine, damaged by the earlier tremors and energy surges, groaned ominously. "The engines are fried," one of the technicians reported grimly. "We're stuck." Dr. Zaxlor's mind raced, considering their options. With Edward and Kira unconscious and their life support systems dwindling, they needed a fast way to the surface. "The lava tubes," he said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with realization. "We can use the planet's natural geothermal vents to ascend." The team looked at him skeptically, but with no other options, they began to prepare for the perilous journey. They fashioned makeshift protective cocoons for Edward and Kira, using salvaged materials from the vehicle. As they set out into the network of superheated passages, the true dangers of their situation became apparent. Toxic gases seeped through cracks in the rock, and the heat was nearly unbearable even in their protective suits. "Watch your step," Dr. Zaxlor warned as they navigated a particularly treacherous section. "One wrong move and dash." His words were cut off by a rumble from above. A shower of rocks cascaded down, nearly crushing one of the team members. They pressed on, the weight of their unconscious companions and the harsh environment taking its toll. As they neared the surface, hope began to rise in their hearts. But fate had one last challenge in store. A massive rockfall blocked their path, cutting off their exit to the world above. "No!" Dr. Zaxlor whispered, his voice filled with despair. "We've come so far." Just as the situation seemed most dire, Edward stirred in his protective cocoon. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening with newfound clarity. "The rocks," he mumbled, his voice weak but urgent. "I can see the weak points." Despite his condition, Edward guided the team, indicating where to focus their efforts to clear a path. With their combined strength and Edward's insight, they slowly but surely created an opening. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they emerged onto the surface of Daxam. The world that greeted them was transformed. Gone were the raging storms and violent quakes. Instead, a calm had settled over the land, the first hints of recovery visible in the clearing skies. As medical teams rushed to their aid, Edward and Kira were carefully extracted from their cocoons. Though unconscious once more, their hands remained clasped tightly together, a physical manifestation of their new bond. Dr. Zaxlor watched as they were whisked away to advanced medical facilities, his mind already racing with the implications of what had transpired in the planet's core. The danger had passed, for now, but he knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter for Daxam, for Earth, and for the two heroes who had risked everything to save them all. The journey back to the surface had taken its toll on Edward and Kira. As they were rushed into Daxam's advanced medical facilities, their hands remained intertwined, a physical manifestation of the bond forged in the planet's core. Days passed in a haze of medical procedures and rest. When Edward finally opened his eyes, he found himself in a pristine white room, the soft hum of machinery filling the air. He turned his head, his gaze immediately landing on Kira in the adjacent bed. "You're awake," she said, her voice a mix of relief and something deeper. Edward tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Kira reached for a glass of water on her bedside table, her movements fluid despite her recent ordeal. As she handed him the glass, their fingers brushed, and a jolt of awareness passed between them. "Did you feel that?" Edward asked, his voice hoarse. Kira nodded, her eyes wide. "It's been happening since we woke up. The doctors say." Her voice trailed off as Dr. Zaxlor entered the room, datapad in hand. "Ah, Edward, good to see you conscious. We have much to discuss." The geologist's face was a mix of excitement and concern as he began to explain the results of their medical scans. Edward listened in growing amazement as Dr. Zaxlor detailed the changes to his physiology. "Your DNA has been fundamentally altered," Dr. Zaxlor said, showing them a holographic display of Edward's genetic structure. "It now shares many characteristics with Kira's enhanced Daxamite biology." Edward flexed his hand, feeling the newfound strength coursing through his muscles. "So, I'm... what? Part Daxamite now?" Dr. Zaxlor nodded. "In a sense, yes. But there's more. Your shared experience in the core seems to have created a unique connection between you two." As if on cue, Edward felt a gentle pressure in his mind. He turned to Kira, seeing the concentration on her face. "Can you hear me?" Her voice echoed in his thoughts. Edward's eyes widened. Yes. How is this possible?" Dr. Zaxlor watched their silent exchange with fascination. Telepathic communication. Extraordinary. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies interactions. As Edward and Kira marveled at their new abilities, the door burst open. Ambassador Steele strode in, his face tight with almost unchecked anger. "We have a situation," he announced. "The Daxamite authorities have learned about Admiral Burns's sampling operation. They're demanding answers and the immediate return of all collected materials." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Edward and Kira shared a worried glance, their newfound connection humming with shared concern. "That's not all," Steele continued, his voice grim. "We've received word from Earth. The Zarkon have regrouped. They're attacking our outer colonies." The news hit like a physical blow. Edward sat up straighter, ignoring the protest of his still healing body. "We need to do something. With our new abilities, maybe we can dash." Dr. Zaxlor interrupted, his voice urgent. "There's another matter we need to address first. The modified cure. It's having unexpected effects on Daxam's ecosystem." He pulled up a series of images on his datapad, showing bizarre plant growths and strangely mutated animals. "We're seeing pockets of accelerated evolution across the planet. If left unchecked, it could disrupt Daxam's entire biosphere." Edward and Kira exchanged a determined look. Without speaking, they came to a decision. "We'll lead an expedition," Kira said, her voice firm. "Our unique physiologies make us the best candidates to interact with these evolving life forms." Ambassador Steele looked ready to object, but Edward cut him off. "This could be the key to everything, helping Daxam, defending Earth, maybe even finding a way to stop the Zarkon. We have to try." Steele's shoulders sagged in resignation. "Fine, but be careful out there. We're walking a diplomatic tightrope as it is." As preparations for the expedition began, Edward and Kira spent every moment honing their new abilities. They practiced coordinating their movements through their mental link, pushing the limits of their enhanced strength and senses. 2 days later, they stood at the entrance to a vast, mist-shrouded valley. The expedition team behind them checked their equipment one last time as Edward and Kira surveyed the alien landscape before them. Strange, luminescent plants pulsed with an inner light. In the distance, they could hear the calls of creatures unlike anything they'd encountered before. The air itself seemed charged with potential. "Ready?" Edward asked, both aloud and through their mental link. Kira nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Together. As they took their first steps into the transformed wilderness of Daxam, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were on the brink of discoveries that would change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both wonders and dangers beyond imagination. But with their newfound bond and shared purpose, Edward and Kira were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ahead, the lush, alien landscape stretched before them, teeming with new life forms born from the modified cure's unexpected effects. As Edward and Kira ventured deeper into the transformed wilderness, their heightened senses picked up on subtle vibrations in the ground. "Do you feel that?" Kira asked, both aloud and through their mental link. Edward nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's coming from over there." They made their way through the dense undergrowth, bioluminescent plants pulsing in response to their presence. The vibrations grew stronger, guiding them to a clearing where the earth had split open, revealing a metallic structure beneath. "This isn't natural," Edward observed, running his hand along the smooth surface. "It's some kind of facility?" As if responding to his touch, a section of the structure slid open, revealing a dimly lit passageway. The expedition team behind them murmured in excitement and trepidation. "We should proceed with caution," Kira said, taking point as they entered the ancient Daxamite facility. The air inside was stale but breathable. As they moved deeper, dormant systems flickered to life, reacting to their presence. They found themselves in a vast chamber filled with unfamiliar technology, its purpose a mystery. Edward's attention was drawn to a central console. As he approached, it hummed to life, holographic displays materializing around him. "It's responding to me," he said, amazed. "I think it's reading my Daxamite DNA." Kira watched as Edward's fingers danced across the interface, his newly enhanced mind processing the alien data structures with surprising ease. Suddenly, the chamber was bathed in light as a massive holographic projection filled the air above them. "It's a map," Kira breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "A map of the galaxy." The projection zoomed and shifted, highlighting a series of points scattered across various star systems. Edward's mind raced as he interpreted the data streaming through the biointerface. "These are outposts," he explained, his voice filled with excitement. "Ancient Daxamite outposts, long abandoned but still intact. And this." He pointed to a large, pulsing marker in an unexplored sector. "It's some kind of space station. Massive, hidden." As they studied the map, absorbing the implications of their discovery, a shrill alarm cut through the air. The facility's security systems had detected multiple incoming threats. "We've got company," one of the expedition members called out, checking a portable scanner. Multiple signatures entering Daxam's atmosphere. They matched Zarkon energy profiles. Before they could react, another alert sounded. "Earth vessels approaching our location," another team member reported. "Looks like a special forces unit." Edward and Kira shared a look of persistence. "We need to secure this data," Edward said, already working to download the facility's information to their portable devices. As the download progressed, the chamber hummed with increasing energy. Panels slid open along the walls, releasing swarms of nanobots that coalesced into defensive formations. "The facility's protecting itself," Kira observed, watching the swirling patterns of microscopic machines. With the data secured, they made their way back to the surface, emerging into chaos. The sky was filled with the sleek, predatory shapes of Zarkon scout ships, exchanging fire with Earth vessels. On the ground, Earth Special Forces clash with Daxamite security teams, each trying to secure the area around the ancient facility. Edward and Kira moved in perfect sync, their mental link allowing them to coordinate their actions flawlessly. Edward's analytical mind processed the battlefield in an instant, predicting enemy movements and formulating strategies. Kira's enhanced reflexes and strength made her a blur of motion, neutralizing threats with precision and speed. In the midst of the fray, a gruff voice called out, "Edward, over here!" Edward turned to see a weathered man in Earth military fatigues approaching, flanked by heavily armed soldiers. Colonel Marcus Graves. The man introduced himself, his eyes darting between Edward and the portable device containing the facility's data. "We need to secure you and that information. Earth's interests must be protected." Kira stepped between them, her posture defensive. "Edward isn't going anywhere," she said firmly. The standoff was interrupted by a Zarkon energy blast that struck nearby, showering them with debris. Kira stumbled, her protective suit damaged by the impact. As the atmosphere of Daxam seeped in, her body began to react to the lingering effects of the modified cure. Edward watched in amazement as Kira's already formidable abilities intensified. Her eyes glowed with an inner light, and the nanobots from the facility swarmed around her, responding to her will. With a gesture, Kira directed the nanobots to form protective barriers and offensive weapons. The tide of the battle turned as she single-handedly repelled both Zarkon and Earth forces, her newfound control over the ancient Daxamite technology proving decisive. As the last of the attackers retreated, Edward rushed to Kira's side, supporting her as the intensity of her transformation subsided. Their eyes met, a moment of silent communication passing between them. The sound of approaching vehicles broke their connection. Zoran arrived with a team of Daxamite scientists, quickly securing the area and beginning to study the exposed facility. "What you've discovered here changes everything," Zoran said, his voice filled with awe as he examined the holographic map. "These outposts, this hidden station. We must act quickly before the Zarkon uncover their existence." As they began to formulate plans for an expedition to the newly discovered locations, the air crackled with tension. Ambassador Steele arrived, his face set in grim lines. "Earth demands equal access to this technology and full participation in any missions to these outposts," Steele announced, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Zoran's expression hardened. "After your unauthorized core sampling?" "I think not. This is Daxamite technology, and we will decide how it's used." The two leaders glared at each other, the fragile alliance between Earth and Daxam threatening to fracture under the weight of this new discovery. Edward and Kira found themselves caught in the middle, their unique status as a human Daxamite hybrid and an enhanced Daxamite making them invaluable to both sides. As the arguments escalated, Edward pulled Kira aside, seeking a moment of quiet amidst the chaos. They found themselves in a secluded corner of the facility's entrance, the sounds of the diplomatic dispute fading into the background. "Are you okay?" Edward asked, his hand gently cupping Kira's face. "That transformation." Kira leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. "I'm fine. Better than fine. Actually, I feel connected to everything. The nanobots, the facility, even the planet itself." Their mental link hummed with shared emotions, concern, excitement, and something deeper, more primal. As the adrenaline of the battle faded, they became acutely aware of their proximity, their enhanced physiologies responding to each other's presence. Without a word, they came together, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The world around them faded away as they lost themselves in the intensity of their connection, their enhanced senses amplifying every touch, every sensation. Their intimate moment was cut short by the urgent beeping of Edward's communicator. With a sigh, he activated the device, revealing a priority message from Earth Space Command. As they read the message, their expressions grew grave. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Zarkon fleet assembling at the edge of the solar system, poised for a full-scale invasion. Edward and Kira shared a look of dedication. The race to uncover the secrets of the ancient Daxamite outposts had just become a desperate sprint against time. As they rejoined the others to begin planning their high-stakes mission, they knew that the fate of both Earth and Daxam hung in the balance. The ancient facility hummed with renewed activity, its long-dormant systems awakening to the challenge ahead. As night fell on Daxam, the first stars became visible in the clearing sky, a glittering expanse that now held both promise and peril for the unlikely allies gathered in its shadow. Shadows. As Edward and Kira gazed at the star-filled sky, the weight of their newfound responsibilities settled upon them. "We need to move quickly," Edward said, turning to face the assembled group. "The Zarkon fleet won't wait for us to be ready." Zoran nodded, his expression grave. "Agreed. We'll assemble a team immediately and prepare for the expedition to the outposts." Over the next few hours, a flurry of activity engulfed the ancient facility. Zoran, with input from Edward and Kira, carefully selected a diverse team of human and Daxamite experts. Dr. Lydia Burns, a brilliant geneticist from Earth, was among the first chosen. Her expertise in alien biology would be crucial in understanding the ancient Daxamite technology they might encounter. As they finalized the team roster, Ambassador Steele approached, his face set in perseverance. "Colonel Marcus Graves will be joining the expedition," he announced, leaving no room for argument. Zoran's eyes narrowed. "Out of the question. This is a Daxamite operation dash." With human participation, Steele cut in. Graves' tactical experience could be invaluable against the Zarkon. Edward, sensing the rising tension, stepped between them. "He's right, Zoran. We need every advantage we can get." He lowered his voice, speaking directly to the Daxamite leader. "I'll keep an eye on him." Reluctantly, Zoran agreed, though Kira's wary glance at Graves didn't go unnoticed by Edward. As preparations continued, a seasoned Daxamite pilot named Voxlar joined the team. His reputation for navigating treacherous space routes preceded him, and his skills would be essential for the dangerous journey ahead. Within hours, the expedition was ready to depart. They boarded a modified stealth ship, its sleek design incorporating technology derived from the ancient facility's data. The ship's cloaking capabilities were unlike anything Earth or Daxam had previously developed. As they prepared for launch, Edward and Kira found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the ship. The hum of the engines vibrated through the floor as Kira placed a hand on Edward's arm. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Edward nodded, covering her hand with his own. "Together, remember?" The ship lifted off, quickly ascending through Daxam's atmosphere. As they broke free of the planet's gravity well, Voxlar's voice came over the intercom. "Setting course for the first outpost," he announced. "It's located in an asteroid field on the fringes of Daxamite space. We'll need to proceed with caution." As they approached their destination, the ship's long-range scanners lit up with alarming data. Dr. Burns, monitoring the readouts, called out, "Multiple Zarkon signatures detected in nearby systems." Colonel Graves moved to the tactical station, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "They're searching for something, likely the same outpost we're after." Voxlar's hands danced across the controls. "Engaging evasive maneuvers. We'll use the asteroid field for cover." The ship darted between massive space rocks, the skill of its pilot evident in every precise movement. Edward and Kira stood at the forward viewport, their enhanced senses allowing them to process the rapidly changing field of asteroids around them. "There," Edward pointed, "the outpost." As they approached, the true state of the ancient structure became clear. Millennia of impacts had taken their toll, leaving the outpost partially destroyed and unstable. "We can't dock," Voxlar said, frustration evident in his voice. "The structure won't support it." Edward and Kira shared a look. "We'll create a safe passage," Kira said, already moving towards the airlock. Using their enhanced abilities, they exited the ship and approached the damaged outpost. Working in perfect synchronization, they manipulated the surrounding debris, stabilizing the structure and forming a secure path for the rest of the team to follow. Once inside, the team spread out, marveling at the ancient Daxamite technology surrounding them. Dr. Burns let out a gasp of excitement as she examined a bank of computers. "These appear to be prototypes," she said, her eyes wide. "Advanced energy weapons, shield systems. This could change everything." As the team worked to salvage what they could, Edward noticed Colonel Graves moving furtively towards a central computer terminal. Before he could investigate, Kira's voice echoed in his mind through their link. "Edward, Graves is up to something," she warned. Moving quickly, Edward approached the colonel, catching him in the act of copying data from the outpost systems. "Colonel," Edward said, his voice level but firm, "what exactly are you doing?" Graves straightened, his hand moving subtly towards a sidearm. "Securing vital intelligence for Earth's defense," he replied, tension evident in his posture. Kira appeared at Edward's side, her body coiled and ready for action. The rest of the team froze, the air thick with sudden hostility. Edward raised his hands, addressing both Graves and the team. "We're all on the same side here. The Zarkon are the real enemy, remember?" He turned to Zoran, who had approached with a thunderous expression. "I propose a compromise. All recovered data and technology will be jointly analyzed by human and Daxamite scientists. Any military applications will require mutual agreement before implementation." The tension in the room slowly dissipated as both sides considered the proposal. Finally, Zoran nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on Graves. "Agreed, but this mistrust cannot continue if we hope to succeed." As the team resumed their work, Edward and Kira moved deeper into the outpost, their enhanced senses alert for any hidden dangers or overlooked treasures. In a lower level, they discovered a sealed chamber, its surface covered in intricate Daxamite script. "Can you read it?" Kira asked, running her hand along the ancient markings. Edward's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a warning. And a promise. Here lie the Guardians, awaiting the time of greatest need." Together, they activated the chamber's long-dormant systems. With a hiss of escaping gases, the sealed door slid open, revealing a row of cryogenic pods. Inside, 3 Daxamite figures lay in suspended animation, their features serene despite the passage of countless years. As Edward and Kira stared in amazement at their discovery, alarms blared throughout the outpost. Voxlar's urgent voice came over the comms. "Zarkon scout ships approaching. We need to leave, now." The race to unlock the secrets of the outpost had begun in earnest, with the fate of 2 worlds hanging in the balance. As Edward and Kira rushed to awaken the ancient Daxamite Guardians, they knew that every second counted in their desperate bid to stop the Zarkon invasion. As they rushed to awaken the ancient Daxamite Guardians, the outpost shuddered under the impact of Zarkon weapons fire. "We need to go now." Voxlar's voice crackled over the comms. "I can't hold them off much longer." Edward and Kira exchanged a quick glance, their enhanced senses allowing them to process the situation rapidly. "We can't leave them," Kira said, gesturing to the cryogenic pods. With a nod, Edward activated the emergency revival sequence. The pods hissed open, revealing 3 disoriented Daxamite figures. "No time to explain," Edward said, helping them to their feet. "We're under attack and need to evacuate." The group rushed through the crumbling outpost, dodging falling debris as they made their way to the ship. Voxlar's expert piloting kept the Zarkon at bay, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. As they boarded, Zoran turned to Edward. We need to lose them. Any ideas? Edward's eyes lit up. The uncharted nebula. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. Voxlar nodded grimly. Strap in. This is going to be rough. The ship lurched as it broke away from the outpost, racing towards the swirling gases of the nearby nebula. The Zarkon pursued, their weapons fire lighting up the void of space. As they entered the nebula, the ship's systems began to flicker and fail. Dense gases interfered with their navigation, forcing Voxlar to rely on his instincts and manual controls. "I can't see a thing," he growled, his hands dancing over the console. "These gases are playing havoc with our sensors." DR, Burns, monitoring the readouts, called out, "The nebula contains pockets of highly energized particles. They're disrupting our systems, but they might also provide cover from Zarkon scanners." Edward moved to the co-pilot seat, his enhanced vision scanning the swirling chaos outside. "There," he pointed, "a clear pocket at 2 o'clock. It should give us a moment to regroup." Voxlar guided the ship into the relatively calm area, the pursuing Zarkon lost in the maze of gas and energy behind them. As the crew caught their breath, a massive shape loomed ahead, barely visible through the nebula's haze. "What is that?" Kira asked, leaning forward to peer through the viewport. Chief Scientist Zarvex, one of the revived Daxamites, stepped forward, her eyes wide with recognition. "It's an ancient Daxamite monitoring station. We used it to study the nebula's properties millennia ago." Colonel Graves spoke up, his tactical mind already assessing the situation. "Can we dock with it? We need repairs, and it might provide valuable intelligence." Zoran nodded. "Agreed. Voxlar, take us in." As they approached the dormant structure, Edward and Kira led a small team to activate the central computer systems. The station creaked to life around them, long dormant systems flickering back online. While they worked, Kira suddenly stiffened, her head tilting to the side. "Edward, do you hear that?" He focused, allowing his enhanced senses to stretch out. A faint, rhythmic sound reached his ears. Life signs. They followed the sound deeper into the station, eventually reaching a sealed chamber. Inside, they found a row of stasis pods, their occupants perfectly preserved. Dr. Burns and Zarvex arrived, quickly assessing the situation. "These must be the original crew," Zarvex said, her voice filled with awe. "We can revive them safely, but it will take time." As the scientists worked to revive the stasis pod occupants, Edward and Colonel Graves scouted the station's outer levels. They reached an observation deck, its expansive viewport offering a clear view of the nebula. "My God!" Graves breathed, his face paling. Through gaps in the swirling gases, they could see a massive Zarkon fleet, using the nebula's interference to mask their approach towards Daxam. Edward's expression resolute. "We need to warn them, but first, we need to get out of here alive." They rushed back to the others, finding the revival process nearly complete. Among the awakened Daxamites was Dr. Kaelnor, a leading expert in Daxamite energy weapons. "Dr. Kaelnor," Zoran said, his voice urgent, "we need your expertise. We recovered advanced technology from another outpost, but we need to integrate it quickly." As the scientists worked to upgrade their ship systems, long-range sensors detected Zarkon scout ships entering the nebula. The race against time intensified, with Edward and Kira using their enhanced abilities to rapidly install the new systems. In a brief moment of respite, Edward and Kira found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the station. The constant danger and stress of their situation deeply affected upon them. Without a word, they came together, drawing strength and comfort from each other in a passionate embrace. Their moment was cut short by an alert from Voxlar. "Zarkon scout ship on intercept course. We need to leave now." The team rushed to their ship, hastily completing final preparations. As they disengaged from the station, The Zarkon vessel opened fire, damaging the docking clamps. "We're stuck," Voxlar shouted, his hands flying over the controls. Edward and Kira shared a look of perseverance. "We've got this," Edward said, as they moved towards the airlock. Using their enhanced strength and coordination, they manually overrode the damaged clamps, freeing the ship. They barely made it back inside before Voxlar launched them into the nebula, beginning a tense game of cat and mouse with the Zarkon scouts. As they navigated the treacherous gases, Dr. Burns and Zarvex made a breakthrough. "We can use the nebula's energy to boost our cloaking technology," Dr. Burns explained. "But we'll need to dive into the densest part of the nebula to charge the systems." Voxlar's hands tightened on the controls. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance. Hang on to something." The ship plunged into a roiling mass of energized particles, alarms blaring as the hull creaked under the strain. Edward and Kira moved through the ship, manually adjusting systems to prevent overload. With a final surge of energy, they burst free of the nebula, their cloaking systems operating at unprecedented levels. As the team caught their breath, the gravity of their situation settled upon them. Zoran turned to the others, his face grim. "We have the coordinates for Nexus Prime, but we also know about the Zarkon fleet approaching Daxam. We can't do both. We have to choose." The tension in the air was palpable as a diverse crew of humans and Daxamites faced an impossible decision. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time was running out. Out! The crew stood in tense silence, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. Edward stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We can't abandon either world. We'll have to split our forces." Zoran nodded, a grim smile on his face. "A bold plan, but it may be our only option." After a brief but intense discussion, the team reached a consensus. Edward, Kira, and a small group would continue to Nexus Prime, while Voxlar piloted the main ship back to Daxam to warn of the impending Zarkon attack. As the crew prepared for their separate missions, Chief Scientist Zarvex approached Edward and Kira. "I have the coordinates for Nexus Prime," she said, her voice low. "It's hidden within the corona of a dying star in a remote system. The journey won't be easy." Edward nodded, his eyes meeting Kira's. "We're ready." The two groups said their hurried goodbyes, the gravity of their mission reflected in each face. Edward and Kira boarded a smaller, faster craft with their team, while the others returned to the main ship. As they departed, Edward watched the larger vessel disappear into the darkness of space, silently wishing his comrades good luck. He turned his attention to the task at hand, inputting the coordinates Zarvex had provided. The journey to Nexus Prime pushed their ship and their abilities to the limit. Intense radiation and gravitational forces battered the craft as they approached the dying star. Inside the ship, alarms blared as systems strained against the hostile environment. "Hull integrity down to 60%. Dr. Burns called out, her fingers flying over the controls. "We can't take much more of this." Kira gripped the pilot's controls, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to navigate the turbulent stellar material. "We're almost there," she said through gritted teeth. "I can sense something ahead." Suddenly, a massive structure emerged from the roiling plasma of the star's corona. Nexus Prime loomed before them, a testament to ancient Daxamite engineering. Its sleek lines and imposing size dwarfed their small craft. As they approached, an impenetrable energy shield flickered into existence, blocking their path. Edward moved to Kira's side, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Together," he said. They closed their eyes, focusing their enhanced abilities on the station's ancient security systems. Their unique physiologies, a blend of human and Daxamite, allowed them to interface with the technology in ways neither species could alone. The shield protecting Nexus Prime pulsed, sending waves of energy cascading across its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, The barrier dissolved. Incredible, Dr. Kaelnor breathed, watching as the way to Nexus Prime opened before them. Kira guided their ship towards a docking port, the craft shuddering as it passed through the last wisps of the star's corona. With a metallic clang, they connected with the station. As the airlock cycled, Edward turned to his team. "Stay alert. We don't know what we'll find in there." They entered Nexus Prime, the air stale and heavy with the weight of millennia. Automated defense systems sprang to life, filling the corridors with a maze of deadly energy beams and trap mechanisms. Edward's analytical mind worked overtime, identifying patterns in the defenses. "Kira, 2 o'clock!" he shouted, watching as she effortlessly dodged a sudden burst of energy. Together, they led the team through the hazardous corridors. Edward's insights and Kira's lightning-fast reflexes allowed them to bypass the worst of the dangers. Behind them, Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor worked to reroute power to essential systems, gradually bringing the ancient station back to life. After what felt like hours of navigating the treacherous passageways, they reached the central control room. The chamber was vast, filled with banks of dormant computers and a central platform that seemed to pulse with latent energy. Dr. Kaelnor rushed to the main console, his fingers dancing over the controls. "This is it," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "The true purpose of Nexus Prime. It's a weapon, capable of disrupting Zarkon technology on a galactic scale." As the weapons expert worked to reactivate the station's primary systems, a low hum filled the air. Lights flickered to life, and holographic displays sprang into existence around them. Kira suddenly stiffened, her enhanced senses on high alert. "We've got company," she warned. "Multiple Zarkon ships approaching fast." Edward moved to a tactical display, watching as enemy vessels converged on their position. "They must have detected the station powering up," he said. "We need to get those defenses online now." The room erupted into action. Edward coordinated the station's automated defenses, directing energy beams and force fields to intercept the incoming Zarkon ships. Kira's enhanced senses allowed her to predict attack patterns, calling out warnings and adjusting their defenses in real time. Despite their efforts, the sheer number of Zarkon forces was overwhelming. The station shuddered as enemy weapons fire impacted its outer levels. "They breached the outer defenses," Dr. Burns shouted over the din of alarms. Colonel Graves, who had insisted on joining the mission to Nexus Prime, took charge of their ground defense. "We need to hold them off until the weapon is operational," he said, his tactical mind already formulating a plan. "Dr. Burns, Zarvex, I need you to keep working on the weapon. The rest of you, with me, will use a combination of Daxamite tech and Earth tactics to slow them down." As Graves led a team to defend against the Zarkon boarding parties, Edward and Kira remained in the control room, working frantically to bring Nexus Prime systems fully online. Suddenly, Dr. Burns let out a gasp. "Edward, Kira, you need to see this," she called, her voice tight with concern. They rushed to her side, looking at the data she had uncovered. Edward's eyes widened as he read the information. "The weapon system," he said slowly, "it needs a living pilot to interface directly with the controls." Kira's face paled. "The power requirements. They're beyond even Daxamite capabilities." As the gravity of their situation sank in, another explosion rocked the station. The Zarkon were getting closer, and time was running out. Edward and Kira shared a look, both knowing what had to be done but dreading the cost. The fate of 2 worlds, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on their next decision. Edward took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Kira's. They both knew what had to be done. "We'll do it," Edward said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll interface with the weapon system." Kira nodded, her hand finding Edward's. Together. Dr. Burns' face paled. "The power requirements. It could kill you both." "We don't have a choice," Kira replied, her teeth clenched. As they moved toward the central platform, another explosion rocked the station. Colonel Graves' voice crackled over the intercom. "We can't hold them much longer." Edward and Kira stepped onto the platform, their bodies trembling as the neural interface activated. Energy coursed through them, their minds merging with the ancient Daxamite technology. Pain seared through their nerves as they fought to control the immense power flowing through their bodies. With a final surge of effort, they activated the weapon. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from Nexus Prime, spreading outward in an ever-expanding sphere. The Zarkon ships surrounding the station suddenly went dark, their systems completely shut down by the weapon's effect. Inside the control room, Edward and Kira collapsed, their bodies smoking from the intense energy discharge. Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor rushed to their side, working frantically to stabilize their condition. Hours passed in tense silence as the two scientists combined their knowledge of Earth and Daxamite medicine. Slowly, Edward and Kira's vital signs began to stabilize, their enhanced physiology fighting to repair the damage. As consciousness returned, Edward found himself in a strange mental landscape. Kira's presence surrounded him, her thoughts and emotions intertwining with his own. They floated in this shared mental space, their individual identities blurring at the edges. In the physical world, their eyes fluttered open simultaneously. Dr. Burns let out a sigh of relief. "Thank God," she murmured, running a scanner over their bodies. Edward tried to speak, but found himself overwhelmed by the sensation of Kira's thoughts in his mind. He turned to look at her, seeing his own confusion mirrored in her eyes. "What's happening?" Kira's voice was barely a whisper, but Edward heard it both with his ears and in his mind. Dr. Kaelnor studied the readings on his equipment, the neural interface. "It seems to have created a permanent link between your minds." As Edward and Kira grappled with their new reality, Colonel Graves entered the control room. "The Zarkon ships are completely disabled," he reported. "We're securing them now." Dr. Burns turned to the tactical display. The weapon's effect. It spread much further than we anticipated. Multiple star systems are reporting Zarkon technology going offline. The implications of their actions began to sink in. They had achieved a significant victory against the Zarkon, but at what cost? Edward and Kira's shared consciousness buzzed with concern for the unintended consequences of their actions. Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Voxlar's ship, bringing reinforcements from Daxam. As the Daxamite crew boarded Nexus Prime, they brought news that confirmed their fears. The weapons pulse had disrupted interstellar travel and communication across a vast swath of the galaxy, affecting both allied and neutral species. Amidst the chaos of securing the station and assessing the weapon's impact, an urgent transmission from Earth cut through the noise. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a grim-faced General Hawthorne. "We detected a secondary Zarkon fleet approaching Earth," Hawthorne reported, his voice tight with tension. "They're using older ships, unaffected by your weapon. We need help, and we need it now." Edward and Kira shared a look, their enhanced connection allowing them to formulate a plan almost instantaneously. Edward spoke for both of them. "We can bring Nexus Prime to Earth. Use it as a mobile battle station to defend against the attack." Dr. Kaelnor's eyes widened. "The station's propulsion systems haven't been used in millennia. It's risky." "It's our only option," Kira said, her tenacity echoing through her mental link with Edward. As the team sprang into action, reactivating long-dormant systems and preparing for the journey to Earth, Edward and Kira found themselves at the heart of the operation. Their ability to interface directly with Nexus Prime systems proved invaluable, allowing for unprecedented control and efficiency. However, the constant mental connection began to take its toll. Headaches pounded behind their eyes, and at times it became difficult to distinguish their individual thoughts and memories. Dr. Burns watched them with growing concern, noting the physical strain of their prolonged neural link. While the preparations continued, Colonel Graves organized the captured Zarkon into containment areas within the station. Surprisingly, some of the aliens offered to cooperate, recognizing their defeat and seeking leniency. This unexpected development created tension among the crew, with debates erupting over how to handle these potential allies. As Nexus Prime prepared to depart, alarms blared throughout the station. The dying star that had concealed them for so long was entering its final death throes. Massive solar flares and gravitational distortions threatened to tear the station apart before their journey could even begin. Edward and Kira moved as one, their minds melding seamlessly with Nexus Prime systems. They guided the massive station through the stellar maelstrom, using its ancient shields to deflect the worst of the star's fury. The structure groaned under the stress, but held together through their combined efforts. With a final burst of power, Nexus Prime broke free of the dying star's gravitational pull. Its engines, dormant for eons, ignited with a brilliant flare of energy. As the station accelerated towards Earth, Edward and Kira remained linked to its systems, their bodies trembling with the effort of maintaining control. The journey pushed both them and Nexus Prime to their limits. Edward and Kira worked tirelessly, using their mental connection to make rapid repairs and adjustments. But with each passing hour, the strain on their bodies intensified. Dr. Burns monitored their vital signs closely, her worry growing as she observed the toll of their prolonged neural interface. As they approached the outskirts of the solar system, long-range sensors detected the Zarkon fleet engaging Earth's defenses. The battle for humanity's homeworld had begun, with Nexus Prime representing the last, best hope for victory. Edward and Kira shared a moment of quiet understanding, their linked minds filled with a mix of dedication and fear. They knew the coming battle would test them in ways they couldn't imagine, but they faced it together, their bond stronger than ever. Nexus Prime surged forward, its ancient weapons powering up as they prepared to join the fight for Earth's survival. The station's crew braced themselves for the coming conflict, knowing that the fate of not just one world, but an entire galaxy, hung in the balance. As Nexus Prime surged forward, its ancient weapons humming with power, the station's long-range sensors painted a grim picture of the battle raging near Earth. The Zarkon fleet had engaged Earth's defenses, their older ships proving resilient against the planet's best efforts. Edward and Kira, their minds still intertwined with the station's systems, felt the weight of Earth's peril. Through their enhanced connection, they coordinated with Earth's military command, formulating a strategy for Nexus Prime's entry into the fray. "We're detecting multiple debris fields," Edward announced, his voice tight with concentration. "The weapon discharge has created gravitational anomalies throughout the system." Kira's consciousness merged with the station's navigation systems, her Daxamite senses allowing her to perceive the subtle shifts in space-time fabric. "Adjusting course," she responded, her thoughts flowing seamlessly into action. Nexus Prime weaved through the treacherous obstacle course of destroyed ships and spatial distortions. The crew watched in awe as Edward and Kira guided the massive station with unprecedented precision, showcasing the true potential of human Daxamite cooperation. As they entered Earth's orbit, the Zarkon fleet immediately diverted their attention to this new threat. Energy weapons lanced out, impacting Nexus Prime's newly reactivated shields. Shields holding at 87%, Dr. Kaelnor reported, his fingers dancing across the console. "But we can't sustain this level of bombardment indefinitely." Edward and Kira shared a determined look, their linked minds already formulating a response. In perfect synchronization, they activated Nexus Prime's defensive systems. The station's weapons erupted to life, unleashing a devastating barrage against the Zarkon ships. The space around Earth lit up with explosions as Nexus Prime's superior firepower tore through the Zarkon fleet. Earth's defenders, reinvigorated by this unexpected ally, pressed their advantage. Colonel Graves' voice cut through the chaos of the command center. "We're deploying our fighter squadrons. They'll provide close support for Earth's forces." On the lower decks of Nexus Prime, a mixed crew of humans and Daxamites scrambled into sleek interceptors. These smaller craft launched from the station, immediately engaging the Zarkon fighters in a furious dogfight. As the battle raged on, Dr. Burns noticed alarming readings on her medical scanners. She rushed to Edward and Kira's side, her face etched with concern. "Your physiologies." "They're changing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The neural interface is triggering rapid genetic alterations." Dr. Kaelnor joined her, his eyes widening as he studied the data. "It's a combination of human and Daxamite DNA, with traces of the station's own technology. This could grant you enhanced abilities, but the long-term effects are unknown." Before they could fully process this revelation, an urgent communication came through from Voxlar on Earth's surface. "A Zarkon strike force has broken through. They're heading for major population centers." Edward and Kira exchanged a pained look, realizing the impossible choice before them: stay connected to Nexus Prime and maintain their advantage in space, or disconnect to lead a ground assault against the invading Zarkon forces. After a moment of silent communication through their mental link, they made their decision. Kira would remain connected to the station, while Edward would lead the ground assault. As Edward prepared to depart, he and Kira shared a final moment together. Their mental link allowed them to express a depth of emotion beyond words. The intensity of their connection, combined with the adrenaline of battle, led to a passionate physical embrace. Their enhanced physiologies heightened every sensation, creating an experience of unparalleled intimacy. For a brief moment, the chaos of war faded away, leaving only their shared consciousness and intertwined bodies. Reluctantly, Edward pulled away, his eyes locked with Kira's. No words were necessary. Their mental link conveyed everything left unsaid. Edward joined Colonel Graves and a team of human and Daxamite soldiers on a rapid deployment vessel. As they descended through Earth's atmosphere, the devastating impact of the Zarkon attack became clear. Cities lay in ruins, with pockets of resistance fighting desperately against the alien invaders. Their ship touched down on the outskirts of a besieged metropolis. The moment the ramp lowered, they were met with a hail of Zarkon weapons fire. Edward's enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge the incoming blasts, his body moving with inhuman speed and precision. "Form up," Edward shouted, his tactical mind assessing the battlefield in an instant. "Graves, take your team and flank left. I'll push through the center." The human Daxamite strike force engaged the Zarkon ground troops, their combined strengths proving a formidable match for the alien invaders. Edward led the charge, his enhanced abilities allowing him to tear through the Zarkon lines. As the ground battle intensified, Kira faced her own challenges aboard Nexus Prime. The strain of controlling the station's systems alone took a severe toll on her body. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought to maintain control. "Kira, your neural activity is off the charts," Dr. Burns warned, monitoring her vital signs closely. "You need to disengage before you suffer permanent damage." Kira gritted her teeth, pushing through the pain. "Not yet," she gasped. "We're so close to turning the tide." In orbit, Nexus Prime's weapons continued to decimate the Zarkon fleet. Ship after ship fell to the station's superior firepower. However, the Zarkon admiral, facing imminent defeat, made a desperate ultimate attempt. All remaining ships set collision course for the enemy station. The admiral's order echoed across the Zarkon communication channels: "We die with honor." Kira's eyes widened as she sensed the incoming threat. In a split-second decision, she diverted all of Nexus Prime's power to its weapons, leaving the shields dangerously weakened. With preternatural accuracy, Kira targeted the incoming Zarkon ships. Beams of energy lanced out from Nexus Prime, destroying ship after ship in rapid succession. But one Zarkon vessel managed to slip through the barrage, its hull blazing as it entered the station's weakened defensive perimeter. The impact rocked Nexus Prime, sending shockwaves through its ancient structure. Kira screamed as the neural interface overloaded, her consciousness violently torn from the station's systems. She collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing from the sudden disconnection. As alarms blared throughout the station, Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor rushed to Kira's side. "We need to stabilize her neural patterns," Dr. Burns shouted over the chaos. "Get me a synaptic regulator, now." On the ground, Edward felt a sudden, sharp pain in his head. He stumbled mid-stride, nearly falling as he sensed Kira's distress through their residual mental link. For a moment, he stood frozen, torn between his duty to the ground assault and his overwhelming concern for Kira. A nearby explosion snapped Edward back to the present. He looked around at the human and Daxamite soldiers fighting alongside him, then back up at the sky where Nexus Prime orbited. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and Edward knew his next decision could determine the outcome of this war. With a heavy heart, Edward steeled himself for the battle ahead. He had to trust in Kira's strength and the skill of those aboard Nexus Prime. Right now, his duty lay here, on the ground, pushing back the Zarkon invasion force. "Graves," Edward called out, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "We need to secure that command post. It's time to show these Zarkon what humanity and Daxamites can do when we work together." As Edward led the charge towards the Zarkon stronghold, the war for Earth entered its most critical phase. The actions of Edward, Kira, and their allies in the coming hours would shape the future of both humanity and the Daxamite people. The battle raged on, its outcome far from certain. The fate of two worlds hanging in the balance as the conflict reached its crescendo. Aboard Nexus Prime, alarms blared incessantly as the station reeled from the impact of the Zarkon kamikaze attack. The once steady hum of its ancient systems now sputtered and whined, struggling to maintain stability. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor rushed to Kira's side, their faces etched with concern as they assessed her condition. "Her neural patterns are erratic," Dr. Burns shouted over the din, her fingers flying across a medical console. "We need to stabilize her quickly." Dr. Kaelnor nodded, his Daxamite physiology allowing him to move within human speed as he prepared a series of synaptic regulators. "Her hybrid physiology is complicating matters," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "We'll need to modify our approach." As they worked tirelessly to revive Kira, her vital signs began to stabilize, though she remained locked in a coma-like state. The steady beep of monitoring equipment provided a grim counterpoint to the chaos engulfing the station. On Earth's surface, Edward led his team deeper into the heart of the besieged metropolis. The once bustling city now resembled a war zone, with shattered buildings and burning vehicles littering the streets. Zarkon forces had entrenched themselves in key positions, turning the urban landscape into a deadly maze. "Watch your six," Edward called out as he ducked behind an overturned transport vehicle. Energy blasts from Zarkon weapons sizzled past, leaving scorch marks on nearby walls. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to process the battlefield in split seconds, identifying weak points in the Zarkon defenses. "Graves, take your squad and flank left," he ordered, his voice calm despite the mayhem surrounding them. "We'll draw their fire and create an opening." As the combined human and Daxamite forces engaged the aliens, Edward's tactical acumen shone through. He led a daring charge, using his superhuman speed and strength to break through the Zarkon lines. The sound of energy weapons and explosions filled the air as they pushed forward, securing key strategic points throughout the city. In the midst of the intense urban warfare, Edward's communicator crackled to life. Colonel Graves' voice cut through the static, his tone grave. "Edward, we have a situation on Nexus Prime." Kira's down and the station's taken heavy damage. We need you back here, ASAP. Edward felt his heart drop, torn between his duty on the ground and his concern for Kira. He surveyed the battlefield, watching as his team continued to make progress against the Zarkon forces. After a moment of contemplation, he made his decision. Major Hawkins. He called out to his second-in-command, a battle-hardened Earth officer. You're taking point. Push these bastards back and secure that command post. Hawkins nodded sharply, understanding the weight of the responsibility. We won't let you down, sir. With a final glance at the ongoing battle, Edward sprinted towards a nearby landing zone where a high-speed transport awaited. As he boarded the sleek vessel, he met the eyes of the pilot, a Daxamite named Trelvor. Get us to Nexus Prime, Edward ordered, strapping himself in, and be prepared for heavy resistance. Trelvor's hands danced across the controls, and the transport shot into the sky. As they ascended, the true scale of the orbital battle became apparent. The space around Earth was littered with debris from destroyed ships, and energy weapons crisscrossed the void in a deadly light show. Zarkon forces concentrating fire on our approach vector, Trelvor announced, his voice tense but controlled, initiating evasive maneuvers. The transport bucked and weaved through the gauntlet of destruction, Trelvor's exceptional piloting skills put to the ultimate test. Edward gripped his seat, his enhanced senses allowing him to track the chaos outside. He watched as Zarkon's ships exploded in brilliant flashes, while Earth's remaining defenses struggled to hold the line. As they neared Nexus Prime, Edward could see the damage the station had sustained. Entire sections were dark, and energy fluctuations rippled across its surface. The transport docked with a shudder, and Edward wasted no time in disembarking. He sprinted through the corridors of Nexus Prime, passing crew members working frantically to repair damaged systems. Upon reaching the central control room, he was met by a grim-faced technician. "Status report," Edward demanded, his eyes already scanning the various displays. "Main weapon array offline, long-range sensors down," the technician reported. "We're operating on auxiliary power, and our shields are at 30% capacity." Edward nodded, steeling himself for what he knew he had to do. He approached the neural interface station, the same one he and Kira had used to control Nexus Prime during their journey. "Sir, are you sure about this?" the technician asked, concern evident in his voice. "Without Kira, the strain on your system will be immense." "We don't have a choice," Edward replied, settling into the interface chair. "Initiate the link." As the neural interface activated, Edward felt a searing pain course through his body. The station systems, damaged and erratic, struggled to connect with his mind. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the discomfort as he fought to bring Nexus Prime's defenses back online. In the medical bay, Dr. Burns leaned over Kira's unconscious form, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Her neural pathways are unlike anything I've seen," she muttered, reviewing the latest scans. The combination of human and Daxamite DNA, along with the station's influence, it's unprecedented. Dr. Kaelnor joined her, his eyes widening as he studied the data. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a particular readout. "Her body is attempting to heal itself, but the lingering effects of the neural interface are interfering with the process." Dr. Burns' eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "What if we use that to our advantage?" She mused. "We could modify the station's interface technology to stimulate her neural pathways, potentially jump-starting her recovery." As the medical team prepared for this risky procedure, Edward's efforts in the control room began to bear fruit. Nexus Prime's weapon systems flickered to life, though still operating at reduced capacity. Edward reached out through the station's communications array, connecting with Earth's remaining orbital defenses. "This is Nexus Prime," he broadcast, his voice strained from the effort of maintaining the neural link. "Initiating coordinated strike on Zarkon fleet. All Earth forces, Prepare to engage on my mark. The space around Earth erupted in a spectacular display of destruction as the combined human and Nexus Prime forces unleashed their full arsenal against the Zarkon fleet. Edward guided the station's weapons with precision, targeting key Zarkon ships and creating openings for Earth's fighters to exploit. As the battle raged in orbit, Major Hawkins and her team on the ground pushed deeper into Zarkon-held territory. They fought their way through the ruins of the city, eventually discovering a hidden entrance beneath the rubble of a collapsed skyscraper. "This is it," Hawkins said, her voice low as she addressed her team. "Intel suggests this is their primary command center. We take this out, we might just turn the tide of this whole invasion." With a nod to her squad, Hawkins led the charge into the Zarkon facility, ready to strike at the heart of the alien command structure. Back on Nexus Prime, Dr. Burns initiated the procedure to revive Kira. As the modified neural interface activated, power fluctuations rippled through the station. In the control room, Edward felt his connection to the defense systems waver. At that critical moment, a massive Zarkon battleship emerged from the chaos of the space battle, its weapons trained directly on Nexus Prime. With the station's defenses faltering, Edward knew they were seconds away from destruction. Acting on pure instinct, Edward pushed his neural link to its absolute limit. He felt as if his mind was expanding, merging with the very essence of Nexus Prime. Energy surged through the station's systems, far beyond their normal capabilities. A burst of blinding energy erupted from Nexus Prime, engulfing the Zarkon battleship. The alien vessel disintegrated in a spectacular explosion, but the strain proved too much for Edward. He slumped in the interface chair unconscious, as alarms blared throughout the station. In the medical bay, Kira's body arched off the bed, her eyes flying open as she gasped for air. Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor rushed to stabilize her, but something unexpected was happening. The neural link, still active, began to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As both Edward and Kira lay unconscious, their minds trapped within Nexus Prime systems, the station's AI began to evolve. Drawing upon the combined experiences and abilities of both humans, it started to develop a form of autonomous function beyond its original programming. Displays throughout the station flickered to life, showing tactical data and repair protocols being executed with unprecedented efficiency. Nexus Prime's weapons came fully online, targeting Zarkon ships with inhuman accuracy. Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor exchanged worried glances as they monitored the situation. "This is incredible," Dr. Kaelnor whispered, watching as Nexus Prime seemed to fight the battle on its own. But at what cost to Edward and Kira? As the newly awakened intelligence of Nexus Prime turned the tide of the space battle, the unconscious forms of Edward and Kira lay still, their minds intertwined with the station systems. The next few hours would determine not only the fate of Earth, but the future of human-Daxamite relations, and perhaps the nature of consciousness itself. The battle for Earth had entered its most critical phase, with the outcome hanging in the balance. As Nexus Prime's evolved AI continued to coordinate the defense of Earth, those aboard the station faced a race against time to safely extract Edward and Kira from the neural interface before their individual identities were lost forever. As Nexus Prime's evolved AI continued to coordinate Earth's defense, the atmosphere within the station's medical bay was tense. Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor huddled over a holographic display, their faces illuminated by the flickering blue light of complex neural patterns. "We're running out of time," Dr. Burns said, her eyes darting between the unconscious forms of Edward and Kira and the data scrolling across the screen. Their neural patterns are becoming increasingly synchronized with the station's AI. If we don't act now, we might lose them forever. Dr. Kaelnor nodded, his Daxamite features set in unyielding commitment. "I've completed the calculations for the electromagnetic pulse. It's risky, but it's our best chance to sever their connection without causing permanent damage." "Let's do it," Dr. Burns agreed, her fingers flying across the control panel as she made the final preparations. The air in the medical bay crackled with unseen energy as the doctors activated the specialized EMP. A low hum built to a crescendo, and for a split second, every system on Nexus Prime flickered. In that moment of darkness, Edward and Kira's bodies jerked as if struck by lightning. When the lights came back on, the monitoring equipment erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Dr. Burns and Dr. Kaelnor moved with practiced efficiency, stabilizing their patients' vital signs. Neural activity returning to baseline, Dr. Kaelnor announced, relief evident in his voice. Slowly, Edward's eyes fluttered open, followed moments later by Kira's. They both sat up, looking disoriented but alert. "What happened?" Edward asked, his voice hoarse. Before Dr. Burns could answer, Kira's head snapped towards Edward, her eyes wide with surprise. "I can't hear you," she said, but her lips didn't move. Edward blinked, realizing he had heard Kira's voice in his mind. "And I can hear you," he replied silently. Dr. Burns watched the exchange with growing fascination. "It seems your shared experience with Nexus Prime systems has left you with a residual telepathic link," she explained, already reaching for a neural scanner. "We need to run some tests to understand the full extent of these new abilities." As the doctors began their examination, the station shuddered from a distant impact. The battle for Earth was just getting started. Hours later, Edward stood in Nexus Prime's control room, his mind interfacing seamlessly with the station systems. Through his newfound link with Kira, he could sense her working tirelessly in the engineering section. Her Daxamite strength and enhanced knowledge, allowing her to repair and upgrade the station's damaged components at an astonishing rate. "Status report," Edward commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority. A technician approached, offering a data pad. "Sir, we've just received word from Major Hawkins. Her team has successfully breached the Zarkon command center on Earth's surface. They've uncovered critical intelligence about the enemy's battle plans and communication networks." Edward's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "Relay that data to Earth's military command immediately. We need to capitalize on this advantage." With a thought, Edward brought Nexus Prime's weapon systems online. Using his enhanced connection to the station and his link to Kira, he orchestrated a series of precision strikes against key Zarkon positions in Earth's orbit. The alien ships, caught off guard by the sudden assault, began to falter. "Their command and control capabilities are crumbling," Edward announced to the control room crew. "Push the attack. Don't give them time to regroup." As the battle in orbit turned in humanity's favor, Kira made a startling discovery in the engineering bay. Her hands moved with blinding speed across a series of holographic interfaces, unlocking previously dormant features within Nexus Prime systems. "Edward," she called out through their mental link, "you need to see this. I've found advanced terraforming and atmospheric manipulation technologies hidden within the station's core programming." Before Edward could fully process this information, a new alert blared through the control room. The long-range sensors had detected a massive Zarkon reinforcement fleet approaching from the edge of the solar system. "How long do we have?" Edward demanded, his mind already racing through potential strategies. "At their current speed, less than 6 hours," a sensor operator reported, her voice tight with tension. Edward's eyes narrowed as he considered their options. Suddenly, an idea struck him, bold, dangerous, but potentially game-changing. "Kira," he communicated silently, "those terraforming technologies you discovered, could we use them to create an artificial asteroid field?" He felt Kira's mind race as she considered the possibility. "It's theoretically possible," she replied, "but it would require an enormous amount of energy and precise control. We'd be pushing Nexus Prime to its limits." "It's a risk we have to take," Edward decided. "Begin the reconfiguration process. I'll coordinate with Earth's forces to buy us as much time as possible." As Kira and Dr. Kaelnor worked feverishly to implement Edward's plan, he prepared a strike team for a final push against the remaining Zarkon forces on Earth's surface. Using the intelligence gathered from the captured command center, they targeted key alien strongholds around the globe. Edward led the charge, his enhanced abilities allowing him to breach even the most heavily fortified Zarkon positions. In one heart-stopping moment, he single-handedly neutralized a powerful energy weapon that threatened to destroy a major population center. The act was captured by news drones and broadcast globally, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of Earth's defenders. As the ground battle raged, Nexus Prime hummed with unprecedented levels of energy. Kira stood at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Her mind merged with the station's systems as she directed the complex process of manipulating nearby space debris and dormant comets. Slowly, a dense field of asteroids began to form in the path of the approaching Zarkon fleet. The artificial obstacle course would force the alien ships to navigate a treacherous path, buying precious time for Earth's forces to regroup and strengthen their defenses. Just as the asteroid field neared completion, Kira made another breakthrough. Her eyes widened as she uncovered a dormant protocol buried deep within Nexus Prime's core programming. "Edward," she called out, her mental voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I've found something. A weapon of last resort. It could potentially disable all Zarkon technology within a vast radius." Edward felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "What's the catch?" Kira's response was grim. Activating it would require a dangerous level of energy output. It could severely damage the station and the neural strain. "It might kill me." As the Zarkon reinforcement fleet began to navigate the artificial asteroid field, Edward raced back to Nexus Prime. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and he knew that the decision he and Kira were about to make would shape the future of not just this battle, but of human Daxamite relations and humanity's place in the galaxy. Edward burst into the control room, his eyes immediately locking with Kira's. In that moment, as the station shuddered under renewed Zarkon attacks, they faced the most crucial decision of their lives. The weight of responsibility pressed down on them both as they considered the potential consequences of their decision. Before either could speak, a shrill alarm pierced the air. Edward's eyes snapped to the main display, where a small, fast-moving object was rapidly approaching Nexus Prime. "Unidentified craft detected," the AI announced. "Approaching from the direction of Daxam." Edward and Kira exchanged a puzzled glance. "Daxam? But they haven't responded to our distress calls," Kira said, her brow furrowed. As they watched, the craft's signature persistence into a familiar pattern. "It's a Daxamite diplomatic vessel," Edward announced, relief evident in his voice. The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as the station's crew prepared for the unexpected arrival. Edward and Kira rushed to the docking bay, arriving just as the sleek Daxamite ship completed its docking procedures. The airlock hissed open, revealing a tall, imposing figure. The Daxamite emissary stepped onto Nexus Prime, his silver robe shimmering under the station's lights. "I am Kelran," he announced, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "I bring critical information from the Daxamite High Council." Edward stepped forward, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm Edward Chun, acting commander of Nexus Prime. This is Kira, our chief engineer." Kelran nodded respectfully to them both before continuing. "There's no time for formalities. Our scientists have made a breakthrough that could turn the tide of this battle." As they hurried to the control room, Kelran explained the nature of his urgent message. Daxamite researchers had discovered a vulnerability in the Zarkon's advanced technology, a specific frequency of electromagnetic radiation that could potentially disable their ships without causing widespread destruction. The control room erupted into a hive of activity as Edward, Kira, Dr. Burns, and Dr. Kaelnor huddled around a holographic display, analyzing the data Kelran had brought. "This could work," Dr. Kaelnor said, his fingers dancing across the interface. "But we need to reconfigure Nexus Prime's power core to emit the required pulse." Edward nodded, his mind racing through the possibilities. "Kira, can we do it?" Kira's eyes were fixed on the scrolling data, her enhanced mind processing the information at lightning speed. "Yes, but it won't be easy. We'll need to modify the station's entire power distribution network." "Whatever it takes," Edward said firmly. "This is our best shot at ending this war without resorting to the ultimate weapon." As they began the intricate process of recalibrating Nexus Prime systems, the main view screen lit up with a burst of weapons fire. The Zarkon reinforcement fleet had breached the outer edges of the artificial asteroid field. "Earth's forces are engaging the enemy," a technician reported. "They're buying us time, but they can't hold out forever." Edward gritted his teeth, knowing that every second counted. He turned to Kira. "I'll handle the power conduits. You focus on the pulse generator." With a nod, they sprang into action. Edward raced through Nexus Prime's corridors, his enhanced physiology allowing him to move at incredible speeds. He reached the first junction box and tore off the panel, his hands moving in a blur as he rerouted power cables. A sudden surge of electricity arced across the exposed wires, narrowly missing Edward's face. He barely flinched, pushing through the danger to complete the modifications. Meanwhile, in the main engineering bay, Kira worked alongside Dr. Kaelnor to fine-tune the electromagnetic pulse generator. The air crackled with unstable energy fields as they made precise adjustments to highly volatile systems. "Kira, your radiation exposure is approaching critical levels," Dr. Kaelnor warned, concern evident in his voice. Kira didn't even look up from her work. "I can handle it. We don't have a choice." As they neared completion of the modifications, Nexus Prime shuddered violently. The view screen showed multiple Zarkon ships breaking through Earth's defensive lines, their energy weapons impacting the station's weakened shields. "Hull breach on Deck 7, a panicked voice called out over the comms. "We're evacuating non-essential personnel to the core." Edward finished rerouting the last power conduit and rushed back to the control room. Alarms blared as he entered, the room bathed in the red glow of emergency lighting. "Status report," he barked. "Shields at 30% and falling," a technician responded. "We can't take much more of this." Edward's mind raced, searching for a solution. With a sudden burst of inspiration, or perhaps desperation, he made a decision. "I'm going to stabilize the main power relay manually," he announced, moving towards the central power column. Dr. Burns grabbed his arm. "Edward, that's suicide. The energy levels are off the charts." He gently but firmly removed her hand. "It's the only way to give Kira enough time to complete the calibrations." Before anyone could stop him, Edward pressed his hands against the pulsing energy core. His body jerked as raw power coursed through him, his enhanced physiology barely able to contain the massive influx of energy. Through their mental link, Kira felt Edward's pain. She redoubled her efforts, her fingers flying across the control panel as she input the final sequence. Suddenly, a massive power surge ripped through the system. The control panel exploded in a shower of sparks, throwing Kira backwards. She hit the ground hard, her face and hands seared by the blast. Despite the excruciating pain, Kira dragged herself back to the smoldering console. With one final Herculean effort, she reached out and activated the pulse generator. Nexus Prime shuddered as it emitted a massive burst of electromagnetic energy. The pulse expanded rapidly, washing over the Zarkon fleet. One by one, the alien ships went dark, their weapons falling silent as they drifted helplessly in space. In the control room, Edward collapsed to the floor, his body covered in severe electrical burns. He fought to stay conscious, his eyes searching for Kira. As the ringing in his ears subsided, he heard Dr. Burns' voice calling for medical assistance. Through blurred vision, he saw a team of medics rushing into the room, Dr. Kaelnor among them. Edward tried to speak, to ask about Kira, but no words came. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, he felt a familiar presence in his mind, Kira, injured but alive. Their shared consciousness filled with relief, pain, and a deep, unspoken bond. As Edward finally succumbed to unconsciousness, one thought echoed between them. They had done it. Earth was safe, but as the medical team worked feverishly to stabilize both Edward and Kira, questions lingered in the air. What would be the long-term consequences of their actions? How would this victory reshape the relationship between Earth and Daxam? And what new challenges awaited them in the aftermath of this interstellar conflict? In the weeks that followed, Nexus Prime's medical bay became a sanctuary for Edward and Kira. Their enhanced physiologies worked overtime, knitting together burned flesh and repairing damaged neural pathways. The station's advanced medical technology, coupled with their hybrid resilience, accelerated their recovery beyond all expectations. 14 days after the final battle, Edward opened his eyes to find Kira sitting on the edge of his bed, her face a patchwork of healing skin. She smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "We made it," she said softly. Before Edward could respond, the door slid open, revealing Dr. Burns. "Good news," she announced, studying her datapad. "You're both cleared for discharge. And not a moment too soon, it seems. Ambassador Steele is requesting your presence at a high-level meeting." Within the hour, Edward and Kira found themselves in Nexus Prime's main conference room. The circular chamber buzzed with activity as Earth and Daxamite representatives filed in, their faces a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. Ambassador Steele stood at the head of the table, flanked by Zoran, the Daxamite diplomat. As Edward and Kira took their seats, Steele cleared his throat. "Edward, Kira," he began, "your actions have not only saved Earth, but have opened the door to a new era of cooperation between our worlds." He gestured to the holographic display at the center of the table, which flickered to life, revealing a complex document. "We've been working on a draft for an interstellar alliance treaty. Your input will be crucial." Zoran stepped forward, his silver robe shimmering under the room's lights. "Your unique status as human Daxamite hybrids, combined with your intimate knowledge of Nexus Prime systems, makes you invaluable to both our peoples." Edward and Kira exchanged glances, sensing where this was heading. "We'd like to offer you joint positions," Steele continued, "as liaisons between Earth and Daxam. You'll oversee technology integration, cultural exchange programs, and, well, there's no easy way to say this. We need your help with the displaced populations on both planets." The next few hours were a whirlwind of briefings and strategy sessions. Edward's mind raced as he absorbed the enormity of the task ahead. Entire regions of Earth lay in ruins, while Daxam grappled with the lingering effects of its near destruction and subsequent restoration. As the meeting concluded, Kira turned to Edward, her eyes alight with commitment. "We should start with the terraforming capabilities," she said. "If we can recalibrate Nexus Prime systems, we might be able to accelerate the restoration of damaged ecosystems." Edward nodded, already formulating a plan. "Let's begin with that contaminated region in the southern hemisphere, the one the Zarkon used as a staging ground." They made their way to Nexus Prime's control center, their steps in perfect sync. As they approached the main console, Edward felt a familiar tingle at the base of his skull. He glanced at Kira, seeing the same recognition in her eyes. Without a word, they placed their hands on the interface. The station system sprang to life around them, holographic displays blooming like exotic flowers. Edward marveled at how seamlessly they worked together, their thoughts intertwining through their residual telepathic link. Initiating recalibration sequence, Kira murmured, her fingers dancing across the controls. Edward focused on the power distribution, channeling energy from Nexus Prime's core to the terraforming arrays. He could feel the raw power coursing through the station, carefully directed by their combined will. On the main view screen, a real-time image of Earth's surface appeared. They watched as a sickly brown patch of land began to pulse with vibrant green energy. Alien contaminants dissolved, replaced by the first tender shoots of native vegetation. "It's working," Edward breathed, amazed at the precision of their control. Their success did not go unnoticed. Within days, scientists from both Earth and Daxam clamored for access to study their methods. Edward and Kira found themselves at the center of a research frenzy, their every move scrutinized for clues about the potential of human Daxamite hybridization. As they worked tirelessly on restoration projects, a new challenge emerged. The captured Zarkon forces, once a unified threat, now presented a complex diplomatic puzzle. A group of moderate Zarkon leaders approached the Earth-Daxam alliance, seeking peace negotiations. Edward and Kira were called upon to mediate these delicate talks. Their unique perspective, born from their hybrid nature and forged in the crucible of war, proved invaluable in bridging the cultural divide. During a crucial negotiation session aboard Nexus Prime, Edward sensed a shift in the air. He caught Kira's eye, seeing the same alertness in her posture. Something was wrong. Moments later, alarms blared throughout the station. A group of hardline Zarkon extremists had launched a surprise attack, targeting the diplomatic quarters. Edward sprang into action, his enhanced physiology allowing him to move with incredible speed. Kira was right beside him, their movements perfectly coordinated as they navigated Nexus Prime's corridors. They reached the diplomatic sector just as the first explosions rocked the station. Through the chaos, Edward spotted a group of Zarkon infiltrators advancing on the negotiation chamber. "Kira, the ventilation shafts," Edward called out, already moving towards a nearby access panel. Together, they climbed into the narrow passage, using their knowledge of the station's layout to outmaneuver the attackers. They emerged behind the Zarkon group, catching them completely off guard. In a flurry of precisely targeted strikes, Edward and Kira neutralized the threat. As the last attacker fell, they heard the sound of approaching security teams. The incident, while harrowing, served to strengthen the commitment of the moderate Zarkon faction. In its aftermath, Edward found himself proposing the creation of a joint Earth-Daxam-Zarkon security force to maintain stability and prevent future conflicts. As the diplomats latched onto this idea, drafting new sections of the peace treaty, Edward and Kira turned their attention to their next mission. They were headed to Daxam to oversee the implementation of Earth-based agricultural techniques in regions still reeling from the effects of the modified cure. As they prepared for their journey, Edward couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. They had come so far, yet the challenges ahead seemed more complex than ever. He looked at Kira, seeing his own tenacity reflected in her eyes. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand. Kira took it, their fingers intertwining. "Always," she replied, as they stepped towards a shuttle that would take them to her homeworld and into the next chapter of their shared destiny. Adventure. As they boarded the shuttle, neither could have anticipated the challenges that awaited them back on Earth. 6 months into their work on Daxam, Edward and Kira received an urgent communique from Ambassador Steele. The situation on Earth had become increasingly complex, with public opinion sharply divided over the new interstellar alliance. It was time for them to return home and address the growing concerns. Their shuttle docked at Nexus Prime, where they immediately transferred to an Earthbound vessel. As they broke through the atmosphere, Edward's hand tightened around Kira's. The sight of their blue planet, still bearing scars from the recent war, stirred a mix of emotions in both of them. "Look," Kira said, pointing to the view screen. Below them, a massive crowd had gathered outside the landing zone. Even from this height, they could see the colorful banners and signs being waved. As the ship touched down, the roar of the crowd became audible. Edward and Kira exchanged a glance before the bay doors opened. They stepped out onto the platform, and the cacophony hit them full force. "Welcome home, heroes!" shouted some, their faces beaming with admiration. "Earth for humans!" others chanted, their expressions twisted with anger and fear. Security personnel formed a cordon around Edward and Kira as they made their way to the waiting transport. Ambassador Steele greeted them, his face lined with new wrinkles of worry. "I'm afraid the situation has become rather volatile," he said as they climbed into the vehicle. "We need to show the people that this alliance is beneficial for everyone." Over the next few weeks, Edward and Kira embarked on a whirlwind tour of Earth's major cities. They visited reconstruction sites, showcasing the incredible speed at which Daxamite technology could repair war-torn infrastructure. In a heavily damaged coastal metropolis, they stood before a gathered crowd, news drones buzzing overhead. Edward raised his hand, activating the communication link with Nexus Prime. The station's massive form became visible in the sky as its terraforming arrays powered up. A beam of energy shot down from the heavens, striking the polluted harbor. The water began to churn and bubble, and within minutes, the murky brown liquid cleared to a pristine blue. Fish, long absent from the toxic waters, began to appear. Gasps of awe rippled through the crowd. Kira stepped forward, her voice amplified by the sound system. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Together, we can restore not just our cities, but our entire planet." As they moved from city to city, Edward and Kira encountered both overwhelming support and fierce opposition. In one location, they found themselves face to face with Colonel Victor Hawthorne, a charismatic former military officer leading a group of human isolationists. "You're selling out our planet," Hawthorne shouted, his followers echoing his words. "We don't need alien technology. We can rebuild on our own." Edward stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Colonel, I understand your concerns, but I've seen firsthand the benefits of this alliance. We're not losing our humanity, we're expanding it." Hawthorne sneered, unconvinced. It was clear that words alone wouldn't be enough to sway the opposition. In response to the growing tension, Edward and Kira decided to take a more hands-on approach. They set up a temporary medical clinic in the heart of a major city, offering treatments using Daxamite technology for ailments previously considered incurable on Earth. Lines stretched for blocks as people came seeking help. Edward and Kira worked tirelessly, their unique abilities allowing them to operate the advanced equipment with unprecedented efficiency. An elderly woman with advanced Parkinson's disease walked out of the clinic, her hands steady for the first time in decades. A child born blind opened his eyes and saw his mother's face for the first time. With each miracle, the tide of public opinion began to shift. As they worked, Edward and Kira noticed changes in their own abilities. During a rescue operation at a collapsed building site, Edward found himself able to manipulate gravitational fields, lifting massive chunks of debris to free trapped workers. Kira's empathic abilities expanded, allowing her to sense the emotional state of entire crowds. This proved invaluable in managing the often tense atmosphere at public events. Their evolving abilities caught the attention of Dr. Eliza Reeves, a prominent Earth geneticist. She approached them after a public demonstration, her eyes alight with scientific curiosity. "Your hybrid physiology is fascinating," she said. "I believe studying it could unlock potential enhancements for all of humanity. Would you be willing to participate in a research study?" Before they could fully consider Dr. Reeves' proposal, alarms blared across the city. An emergency transmission came through. One of Earth's orbital stations was in crisis. A life support malfunction, caused by improperly integrated Daxamite technology, threatened hundreds of lives. Without hesitation, Edward and Kira boarded a high-speed shuttle. As they approached the station, They could see emergency lights flashing through the viewports. Inside, they found chaos. Toxic gases seeped through compartments, and panicked researchers and their families huddled in sealed areas. Edward concentrated, extending his hands. The gases seemed to pause in midair, contained by an invisible force field. "I can hold it," he grunted. "But not for long." Kira placed her hands on a hybrid control panel, her mind interfacing directly with the station systems. Her fingers flew across the interface as she identified the source of the malfunction and began to implement fixes. Minutes stretched like hours as they worked in perfect synchronization. Finally, with a hiss and a whir, the station's air filtration system came back online. The toxic gases dissipated, and cheers erupted throughout the station. As they returned to Earth, exhausted but triumphant, they found a shift in the public mood. The crisis had highlighted both the potential and the risks of the new alliance. In response, Ambassador Steele proposed the creation of a joint human Daxamite technology integration board, with Edward and Kira as key advisors. Just as they began to settle into their new roles, an urgent message arrived from Daxam. Scientists there had made a breakthrough in understanding the long-term effects of the modified cure used to stabilize the planet's core. The findings hinted at unforeseen consequences for Daxam's ecosystem and population. Edward and Kira knew their expertise would be crucial in addressing this new challenge. As they prepared for their return to Daxam, they also grappled with the implications of their evolving hybrid status and its impact on their future together. Boarding the sleek interstellar vessel that would take them back to Daxam, Edward and Kira stood at the viewport, watching Earth shrink behind them. The planet looked different now. Not just their home, but a symbol of the complex interstellar community they were helping to build. As the ship accelerated towards Daxam, they turned their thoughts to the challenges ahead. The scientific crisis on Daxam, the ongoing struggle for acceptance on Earth, and the personal journey of understanding their own changing nature. All these awaited them. With a shared glance, they silently reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to the worlds they served. The vastness of space stretched before them, full of both promise and peril. As Earth faded from view, replaced by the star-studded expanse of the galaxy, Edward and Kira prepared themselves for whatever lay ahead in this new chapter of their shared interstellar adventure. As their ship approached Daxam, the planet's swirling atmosphere came into view, a mix of familiar blues and greens interspersed with unfamiliar hues. Edward and Kira exchanged a concerned glance, knowing that the world below had changed significantly since their last visit. Upon landing, they were greeted by Dr. Zarvex, a tall Daxamite with striking silver eyes. Her usually composed demeanor was tinged with worry as she led them to a nearby research facility. "I'm glad you're here," Dr. Zarvex said, her voice tight. "The situation is evolving faster than we anticipated." Inside the facility, holographic displays flickered to life, showing time-lapse imagery of Daxam's landscapes. Edward and Kira watched in astonishment as forests transformed, new species emerged, and entire ecosystems shifted in a matter of weeks. "The modified cure we use to stabilize the planet's core," Dr. Zarvex explained. "It's triggering rapid genetic mutations across our biosphere." Edward stepped closer to one of the displays, his brow furrowed. "How widespread is this?" "Global," Dr. Zarvex replied. "But the effects are most pronounced in certain regions. We've set up research stations in the most impacted areas." Over the next few days, Edward and Kira joined teams of Earth and Daxamite scientists in a comprehensive survey of the affected zones. They trekked through dense jungles where bioluminescent plants pulsed with eerie light, scaled cliffs covered in rapidly evolving lichen, and dove into lakes teeming with new aquatic life forms. Edward's enhanced strength and newly developed gravitational manipulation abilities proved invaluable. In one instance, he cleared a path through a thicket of thorny vines that had sprung up overnight, blocking access to a crucial research site. Kira's empathic powers allowed her to sense the presence of mutated organisms, guiding the team to previously undiscovered species. Her ability to connect with the altered life forms provided unique insights into their behavior and needs. As they collected samples and data, a pattern began to emerge. Dr. Zarvex called an emergency meeting at the Central Research Hub. "We detected a particularly alarming development in our oceans," she announced, bringing up a holographic model of Daxam's marine ecosystem. "A new species of algae has evolved, producing a potent neurotoxin." The model zoomed in, showing the microscopic algae multiplying at an alarming rate. Edward leaned forward, studying the data scrolling alongside the image. "This toxin," he said, "it's not just affecting marine life, is it?" Dr. Zarvex shook her head grimly. "No, we've detected trace amounts in the air near coastal regions. If it continues to spread, it could pose a significant threat to our entire population." Kira placed a hand on the holographic display, her eyes closed in concentration. "I can sense the algae's presence," she said. "It's adapting, evolving to survive in different environments." The team worked tirelessly in Nexus Prime's advanced laboratories, analyzing the toxin and developing a neutralizing agent. Edward's experience with Earth's biotechnology and Kira's intimate connection with Daxamite biology proved crucial in creating a countermeasure. However, as they prepared to test the neutralizing agent, a new challenge emerged. Protests erupted outside the research facility, led by a charismatic Daxamite named Lyrisin. "Stop interfering with our planet's natural evolution." Lyrisin shouted through a megaphone, her followers cheering in agreement. "These changes are Daxam's way of healing itself." Edward and Kira found themselves caught between scientific necessity and the deeply held beliefs of the Daxamite people. They arranged a meeting with Lyrisin, hoping to find common ground. In a tense conference room, Lyrisin faced off against the research team. "You claim to be helping us," she said, her eyes flashing. "But how do we know this cure won't cause even more damage?" Kira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We understand your concerns, Lyrisin. We're not here to override Daxam's natural processes, but to address an immediate threat to your people's safety." After hours of negotiation, a compromise was reached. The team would proceed with neutralizing the toxic algae, but certain areas would be designated as protected zones, allowing for the study of Daxam's evolving ecosystem without intervention. With the agreement in place, the team moved quickly to implement their plan. Edward coordinated with Nexus Prime, preparing the station's terraforming arrays to disperse the neutralizing agent across Daxam's oceans. Kira took to the skies in a high-altitude aircraft, her empathic abilities allowing her to monitor the dispersal of the agent and its effects on marine life. For days, they worked around the clock, adjusting the process as needed. Gradually, toxin levels in the oceans began to decrease. The team watched with relief as affected marine species showed signs of recovery. However, their success was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning of a long process of understanding and adapting to Daxam's new reality. As they prepared to delve deeper into studying the long-term implications of the planet's accelerated evolution, an urgent message from Earth cut through their plans. Ambassador Steele's holographic form appeared before them, his expression grave. "Edward, Kira," he said, his voice tight with concern, "we need you back on Earth immediately. Colonel Hawthorne's isolationist movement has gained significant traction. They're pushing for legislation to limit alien technology integration, and there's been a rise in hate crimes against human Daxamite couples." Edward and Kira exchanged a look of dismay. The fragile alliance they had worked so hard to build was under threat. "There's more," Ambassador Steele continued. "A group of extremists has attacked a joint human Daxamite research facility. They're after sensitive data, including your medical records." Without hesitation, Edward and Kira prepared for their return to Earth. As they boarded the fastest available spacecraft, Dr. Zarvex approached them. We'll continue to work here, she assured them. Go. Protect what we've built together. As their ship broke through Daxam's atmosphere, Edward and Kira steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. The vast expanse of space stretched before them, but their thoughts were focused on Earth and the growing crisis that awaited their return. As their ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, the serene blue of the planet's oceans gave way to the stark reality of their mission. The attacked human Daxamite research facility came into view, its once pristine exterior now marred by scorch marks and gaping holes. Edward's hands tightened on the controls as he guided their spacecraft towards the facility's rooftop. Kira, I'm going to need your help for a smooth landing, he said, his voice tense. We can't risk alerting anyone to our presence. Kira nodded, placing her hands on the console. Her empathic abilities stretched out, sensing the chaos within the building below. I've got you. There's a clear spot on the eastern corner of the roof. The attackers are concentrated on the lower levels. With practiced precision, Edward manipulated the gravitational fields around their craft, gently lowering it onto the designated landing spot. The ship touched down without a sound, its stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of the damaged facility. As they exited the craft, the acrid smell of smoke and ozone filled their nostrils. Kira pointed to a nearby ventilation shaft, its cover hanging loose. There, we can enter through there and bypass their main defenses. Edward nodded, using his enhanced strength to quietly remove the cover. They slipped inside, navigating the narrow confines of the ventilation system with practiced ease. The sounds of conflict echoed through the metal shafts, shouts, the occasional burst of weapons fire, and the ominous hum of unfamiliar technology. After several tense minutes of crawling through the dusty shafts, they reached a grate overlooking a secure laboratory. Inside, a group of researchers huddled behind makeshift barricades, their faces etched with fear and grit. Edward carefully removed the grate, and they dropped silently into the room. The researchers startled at their sudden appearance, but quickly relaxed upon recognizing the pair. Dr. Amelia Foster, her lab coat stained with soot and sweat, approached them. Edward, Kira, thank God you're here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They came out of nowhere, using some kind of advanced tech to bypass our security systems. Kira placed a reassuring hand on Dr. Foster's shoulder, her empathic abilities soothing the scientist's frayed nerves. What's the situation, Doctor? What are they after? Dr. Foster took a deep breath, steadying herself. They've taken control of the main data center. They're trying to access and destroy all our research on human Daxamite physiology. If they succeed, years of work will be lost, not to mention the potential threat to your safety. Edward's teeth gritted as he surveyed the room. We need to secure this lab first. Then we can work on retaking the facility. He moved to the barricaded door, assessing its strength. With careful application of his gravitational abilities, he reinforced the makeshift defenses, fusing metal and concrete into a more solid barrier. As Edward worked, Kira closed her eyes, extending her empathic senses throughout the building. I can sense them, she murmured. There are at least 20 attackers spread across 3 floors. They're focused, determined, and afraid. They truly believe what they're doing is right. Edward finished his work on the defenses and turned to Kira. Can you pinpoint their locations? Kira nodded, her eyes still closed in concentration. Yes, I can track their movements. But there's something else. A familiar presence in the data center. It feels like Daxamite technology. Dr. Foster's eyes widened. That's impossible. Unless... She trailed off, her face paling. Unless what, Doctor? Edward pressed. There was a joint development project, Dr. Foster explained. Prototype integration of Daxamite and human tech. It was highly classified, but if they got their hands on it. Edward and Kira exchanged a grim look. The situation was even more serious than they had initially thought. They quickly formulated a plan, drawing on their unique abilities and intimate knowledge of the facility's layout. "We'll split up," Edward said, his voice low and determined. "I'll head to the power core and disrupt their equipment. Kira, you make your way to the central server room and secure the data. We'll use our comms to stay in touch." Kira nodded, her expression resolute. "Be careful, Edward. These aren't just ordinary extremists we're dealing with." With a final shared glance, they slipped out of the secure lab and into the chaotic corridors of the facility. Edward headed down, using his gravitational manipulation to create distractions, sudden shifts in weight that sent attackers stumbling, or quiet implosions that drew their attention away from his true path. Kira moved upward, her empathic abilities allowing her to anticipate the movements of the extremists. She glided through the shadows, her enhanced agility making her practically invisible to the untrained eye. As Edward approached the power core, he could hear the low hum of machinery mixed with unfamiliar electronic whines. He peered around a corner to see a group of attackers huddled around a device that pulsed with an eerie blue light, the stolen Daxamite tech. Taking a deep breath, Edward focused his powers. With precise control, he generated a series of localized electromagnetic pulses. The stolen device sputtered and died, along with the attackers' communication equipment. Shouts of confusion and anger filled the air as their carefully laid plans fell apart. Meanwhile, Kira had reached the central server room. As she prepared to enter, she sensed a powerful presence inside, the leader of the extremist group. She tensed, knowing that a confrontation was inevitable. The door slid open, and Kira found herself face-to-face with a tall, imposing man whose features bore a striking resemblance to Colonel Hawthorne. Recognition flashed in his eyes as he saw her. "Ah, the alien's pet," he sneered, raising a weapon that crackled with unstable energy. "Here to protect your precious abomination of science." Kira didn't respond with words. Instead, she launched into action, her movements a blur as she closed the distance between them. The leader fired, but Kira's enhanced reflexes allowed her to dodge the erratic energy blasts. Their fight was intense and brutal, a dance of advanced combat techniques and raw tenacity. Kira's agility gave her an edge, but the leader's weapon kept her at bay. She took a glancing hit to her shoulder, the energy searing through her suit and leaving a painful burn. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Kira pressed her advantage. She feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping the leader's legs out from under him. As he fell, she grabbed his weapon, using her momentum to flip him over her shoulder and slam him into the ground. The leader lay stunned as Kira quickly secured his hands behind his back. She tapped her comm unit. "Edward, I've neutralized the leader and secured the server room. What's your status?" Edward's voice came through, slightly strained but clear. "Power core secured. I've disabled their tech, but they managed to transmit some data before I could stop them. We need to do a full assessment of what was compromised." As Earth security forces finally breached the facility, Edward and Kira regrouped in the central server room. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the implications of the attack were only beginning to unfold. Dr. Foster joined them, her face grave as she examined the server logs. "They access files containing detailed information about your unique physiology," she said, looking up at Edward and Kira. "This could pose a significant threat to your safety and the stability of the Human Daxamite Alliance." Edward ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "We need to contain this, and we need to find out where they transmitted that data." Before they could discuss further, a priority message came through on their secure channel. Dr. Zarovex's holographic form appeared before them, her usual composure shaken. "Edward, Kira," she said, her voice urgent. "We have a situation on Daxam. The neurotoxin-producing algae has mutated again. It's developed resistance to our neutralizing agent. If we don't act quickly, All our previous efforts will be undone. Edward and Kira exchanged a look of dismay. They were caught between two crises, both with potentially devastating consequences for the alliance they had worked so hard to build. "We need to go to Nexus Prime," Kira said after a moment of tense silence. "It's the safest place for us right now, and we can coordinate our response to both situations from there." Edward nodded in agreement. As they prepared to leave for the orbital station, they briefed Ambassador Steele on the situation and the need for enhanced security measures for all joint human Daxamite projects. The shuttle ride to Nexus Prime was tense, filled with urgent communications and rapid strategizing. As the station came into view, its sleek form a beacon of hope amidst the stars, Edward and Kira steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. They knew that their unique abilities and their intimate understanding of both human and Daxamite biology might be the key to solving both crises. As the shuttle docked with Nexus Prime, they were already formulating plans to address the data breach on Earth and the evolving ecological disaster on Daxam. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and Edward and Kira found themselves at the center of it all, ready to face whatever came next. As the shuttle approached Nexus Prime, Edward and Kira exchanged a tense glance. The looming crises on both Earth and Daxam took a toll on their minds. "We can't afford to split our focus," Edward said, his hand hovering over the navigation controls. "The ecological disaster on Daxam needs immediate attention." Kira nodded, her empathic abilities sensing the gravity of his decision. "You're right. We should redirect to Daxam. I'll inform Dr. Zarvex of our change in plans." With a deft movement, Edward altered their course, the shuttle's engines flaring as they adjusted their trajectory towards Daxam. The blue-green orb of the planet soon filled their view screen, its beauty masking the ecological turmoil beneath its atmosphere. Upon landing in Daxam's capital city, they were met by Dr. Zarvex, her usual composed demeanor strained by the urgency of the situation. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading them briskly towards the main research facility. "The mutation rate of the algae has accelerated beyond our initial projections." Inside the lab, holographic displays flickered with real-time data on the spreading contamination. Edward and Kira immediately joined the team of Daxamite scientists, their unique physiologies allowing them to work tirelessly alongside their alien counterparts. Hours blurred into days as they analyzed samples, ran simulations, and tested potential countermeasures. The lab hummed with activity, the air thick with the acrid smell of chemicals and the underlying tension of their race against time. On the third day of their relentless work, a priority transmission from Earth interrupted their efforts. Ambassador Steele's holographic form materialized in the center of the lab, his face etched with concern. "Edward, Kira, we've made a disturbing discovery," Steele began without preamble. "Our intelligence agencies have traced the origin of the data breach. The stolen information about your physiology is being used to develop a bioweapon on one of Saturn's moons." The news hit them like a physical blow. Edward's fists clenched at his sides, while Kira's empathic senses reeled from the implications. "We can't ignore this threat," Edward said, his voice low and intense. "But we can't abandon the work here on Daxam either." Kira placed a hand on his arm, her touch conveying support and understanding. "We'll have to divide our efforts. I'll stay here and continue working on the algae crisis. You take a team to Saturn and neutralize the bioweapon threat." The decision was difficult, but necessary. As Edward prepared for the mission to Saturn, he and Kira shared a private moment in their quarters. Their enhanced physiologies heightened every sensation as they held each other close, their connection transcending the physical. "Be careful," Kira whispered, her fingers tracing the contours of Edward's face. "I'll be with you, even across the vast distance of space." Edward's team assembled quickly, a mix of Earth and Daxamite operatives. Major Sarah Hawkins, now head of Earth's Interstellar Security Task Force, brought her tactical expertise to the mission. Trelvor, the skilled Daxamite pilot who had proven his worth during the battle for Earth, took the helm of their stealth craft. As Edward's ship disappeared into the depths of space, Kira refocused her efforts on the algae crisis. Her heightened intuition, combined with her understanding of both human and Daxamite biology, led her to a breakthrough. The neutralizing agent needs a catalyst, she explained to Dr. Zarvex, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. A rare mineral found only in Daxam's deepest ocean trenches could be the key. The solution, however, presented its own set of challenges. Retrieving the mineral would require a dangerous expedition into the crushing depths of Daxam's oceans. Without hesitation, Kira volunteered to lead the mission. "My enhanced physiology gives me the best chance of success," she argued, overriding the concerns of the Daxamite scientists. As Kira prepared for her deep-sea dive, Edward's team approached Saturn's system. They used advanced cloaking technology to evade detection, the ringed planet looming large in their view screen as they neared their target moon. The hidden base was a fortress of alien metal and advanced technology, nestled in the cratered surface of the barren moon. Edward led the infiltration, his gravitational abilities allowing the team to move silently through the facility's defenses. Inside, they discovered a nightmarish scene. Human extremists worked alongside rogue Zarkon scientists, their combined knowledge fueling the creation of a bioweapon designed to target human Daxamite hybrids like Edward and Kira. As Edward's team moved to secure the facility, alarms blared. The extremists responded with a ferocity born of desperation and zealotry. The narrow corridors of the base erupted into a chaotic battlefield. Edward's gravitational manipulation turned the environment itself into a weapon. Bulkheads buckled. Equipment flew through the air, and enemy combatants found themselves suddenly weightless or crushed by invisible forces. In the heat of the battle, Edward was exposed to a prototype of the bioweapon. He felt a searing pain course through his body, his hybrid physiology under attack from within. Thousands of kilometers away on Daxam, Kira piloted a modified submersible into the planet's deepest ocean trench. The pressure at this depth was unimaginable, the darkness absolute save for the vessel's lights. As she navigated through a maze of underwater canyons, Kira suddenly doubled over in pain. Through their psychic link, she felt Edward's distress. The submersible veered dangerously close to a jagged rock formation as Kira fought to maintain control. With supreme effort, she steadied the vessel and her own racing thoughts. The success of her mission was crucial not only to Daxam's survival, but now to Edward's as well. With rekindled grit, she pushed deeper into the abyss, the rare mineral they sought finally coming into view on her sensors. As Kira secured the precious cargo, Edward's team on Saturn's moon cornered the last of the extremists. Despite the effects of the bioweapon coursing through his system, Edward led the final push to secure the facility and its dangerous research. The battle won, but far from triumphant, Edward's team rushed to stabilize his deteriorating condition. Major Hawkins established a secure channel to Daxam, urgently requesting Kira's expertise. Kira, having just returned from her deep-sea expedition, received the transmission with a mix of relief and fear. Without hesitation, she commandeered the fastest available Daxamite vessel, pushing its engines to the limit as she raced toward Saturn. The vast distances of space seemed to shrink as Kira's ship streaked towards a ringed planet, her thoughts focused solely on reaching Edward in time. As she approached the moon, she could sense Edward's weakened state through their bond, driving her to push the ship's systems beyond their normal limits. Upon landing, Kira rushed to Edward's side, her medical knowledge and intimate understanding of their unique biology guiding her actions. Working alongside the team's medic, she stabilized Edward's condition, her hands steady even as her heart raced. As Edward regained consciousness, his eyes locked with Kira's. No words were needed. Their connection spoke volumes. With Edward out of immediate danger, The team focused on securing samples of the bioweapon and its research data, vital for developing a cure. The hidden base erupted in a series of controlled explosions, erasing all traces of the nefarious research. As they watched the facility crumble from the safety of their ship, Edward and Kira knew that their challenges were just the beginning. Their return to Daxam was marked by a mix of relief and urgency. Dr. Zarvex had made progress with the new neutralizing agent, but finalizing the formula required Kira's expertise and the rare mineral she had retrieved from the ocean depths. In the main research lab, Edward lay on a medical bed, his body still fighting the effects of the bioweapon. Nearby, Kira worked feverishly with the Daxamite scientists, racing to perfect the algae neutralization formula before the planet's ecosystem reached a point of no return. The couple exchanged a look of commitment tinged with exhaustion. They had overcome incredible odds, but the true test of their tenacity and the strength of the human Daxamite alliance was just beginning. The couple exchanged a determined look, their shared experiences forging an unbreakable bond. As they stepped off the ship on a Daxamite soil, a team of medical personnel rushed to meet them. Dr. Zarvex, her face etched with concern, directed them towards a nearby facility. "We've prepared a specialized chamber for Edward," she explained, leading them through sterile corridors. "It's designed to handle hybrid physiology." The medical bay hummed with advanced technology. Edward was quickly ushered onto a bed, his skin pale and clammy. Kira held his hand tightly as Dr. Zarvex began administering a series of targeted therapies. "We've synthesized these treatments using the bioweapon samples you retrieved," the doctor explained, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "It's our best chance at counteracting the effects." Kira nodded, her eyes never leaving Edward's face. "I'll stay with him," she said softly. Dr. Zarvex placed a hand on Kira's shoulder. "We also need your expertise in the lab. The neutralizing agent for the algae crisis isn't complete without your input." Torn between her roles as partner and scientist, Kira hesitated. Edward squeezed her hand weakly. "Go," he whispered. "I'll be fine. Daxam needs you." With a final, lingering look at Edward, Kira followed Dr. Zarvex to the adjacent laboratory. The room buzzed with activity as Daxamite scientists pored over data streams and manipulated complex molecular models. Kira immersed herself in the work, her unique understanding of both human and Daxamite biology proving invaluable. She worked tirelessly, refining the formula using the rare mineral she had retrieved from the ocean depths. Days blurred together in a haze of calculations and experiments. Kira divided her time between the lab and Edward's bedside, snatching moments of rest when she could. Her enhanced physiology allowed her to push beyond normal human limits, but the strain was evident in the dark circles under her eyes. On the fourth day, a breakthrough finally came. Kira stared at the holographic model floating before her, its molecular structure pulsing with potential. "This is it," she breathed, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "The neutralizing agent is ready." Dr. Zarvex quickly assembled a team to deploy the agent across Daxam's affected oceans. Kira led the operation, coordinating a fleet of advanced submersibles from a command center in the capital city. As the submersibles fanned out across Daxam's vast oceans, Kira monitored their progress on a massive holographic display. Depth readings and chemical analysis data streamed in real time, painting a picture of the planet's aquatic ecosystem. Initiating dispersal at Sector 17, a Daxamite operator announced. Kira watched as the neutralizing agent spread through the water, a cloud of hope expanding outward. Hours passed as the team worked methodically, ensuring comprehensive coverage of the affected areas. Kira's eyes burned from staring at the displays, but she refused to leave her post. As the last submersible completed its run, a hush fell over the command center. All eyes turned to the main screen, watching for any sign that their efforts had succeeded. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, The toxic algae levels began to drop. A cheer erupted from the assembled team as the readings continued to improve. Exhausted but elated, Kira made her way back to the medical facility. She found Edward sitting up in bed, his color much improved. "How are you feeling?" she asked, taking his hand. Edward managed a weak smile. "Better. Dr. Zarkon says the treatments are working." He nodded towards a data pad on the bedside table. "I've been reviewing the information we retrieved from Saturn's moon. There's more to this than we thought." Kira raised an eyebrow, but before Edward could elaborate, an urgent communication came through. Ambassador Steele's holographic form materialized in the room, his expression grave. "Edward, Kira, we have a situation," Steele began without preamble. "News of the bioweapon plot has leaked to the public. We're seeing widespread panic and renewed tensions between humans and Daxamites." The ambassador's words hung heavy in the air. Edward and Kira exchanged a look, recognizing the fragility of the alliance they had worked so hard to build. "We need to address this," Edward said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Both Earth and Daxam simultaneously." Kira nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We can use Nexus Prime's communication array, a joint broadcast of both worlds." As they began to plan their response, Kira's data pad chimed with an incoming message. She glanced down, her eyes widening as she read the report from the ocean monitoring stations. "Edward," she said slowly, "I think we've stumbled onto something big. The deep-sea readings. They're like nothing we've seen before." The couple locked eyes, the weight of their responsibilities settling over them. They stood at a crossroads, with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. The challenges ahead were daunting, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The couple exchanged a determined look, their shared experiences forging an unbreakable bond. Without wasting another moment, they sprang into action, ready to confront the dual challenges before them. "We need to split up," Edward said, his voice steady despite his weakened state. "I'll lead a team to infiltrate the anti-alien networks meeting. We can't let their plans go unchecked." Kira nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I'll stay here on Daxam to investigate these deep-sea readings. There might be something in those depths that could help us fight the bioweapon." They quickly assembled their teams. Edward gathered a group of elite operatives, a mix of humans and Daxamites, each chosen for their unique skills and unwavering loyalty to the Alliance. Kira, meanwhile, recruited top scientists from both worlds, eager to unravel the mysteries lurking in Daxam's oceans. As Edward prepared for departure, Kira embraced him tightly. "Be careful," she whispered, her enhanced senses picking up the faint tremor in his muscles, a lingering effect of the bioweapon. "Always," he replied with a small smile. "Keep me updated on your findings. I have a feeling they'll be crucial." Edward's team boarded their stealth ship, its sleek design incorporating the latest in cloaking technology. As they lifted off, Kira watched until the ship vanished from sight, then turned her attention to the task at hand. The research facility buzzed with activity as Kira led her team into the depths. Using advanced submersibles, they descended into the inky blackness of Daxam's deepest trenches. The pressure at these depths was immense, but their vessels held firm. As they navigated through underwater canyons, their sensors picked up readings of life forms unlike anything they'd encountered before. Bioluminescent creatures pulsed in the darkness, their ethereal glow painting the ocean in surreal hues. "Look at this," Dr. Zarkon exclaimed, pointing to a holographic display. "These organisms have evolved at an unprecedented rate. Their cellular structure is extraordinary." Kira leaned in, her eyes widening as she processed the data. "These adaptations, they're not random. It's almost as if they've evolved specifically to counteract the effects of the algae bloom." As they collected samples and ran analysis, a pattern began to emerge. Some of the deep-sea organisms displayed properties that could potentially neutralize the bioweapon targeting human Daxamite hybrids. Excitement rippled through the team as they realized the implications of their discovery. Kira immediately initiated a secure communication link with Earth's top geneticists, sharing their findings and beginning collaborative work on synthesizing a cure. Meanwhile, light years away, Edward and his team approached the remote outpost where the anti-alien network was gathering. Using his gravitational manipulation abilities, Edward created a localized field that bent light around their ship, rendering them invisible to both visual and electronic detection. They touched down silently on the outpost's outer rim. Edward signaled to his team, and they moved out with practiced precision. Daxamite operatives used their enhanced strength to pry open access panels, while human tech experts quickly bypassed security systems. As they infiltrated deeper into the facility, they overheard fragments of conversation that chilled them to the core. The network was planning coordinated attacks on key human Daxamite projects, with Nexus Prime as their primary target. Edward's team worked swiftly, planting surveillance devices and tapping into the outpost communication systems. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, gathering crucial intelligence on the network's membership and future plans. In a secure server room, they hit the jackpot. Edward downloaded terabytes of data, including detailed attack plans and a list of sleeper agents embedded in both human and Daxamite societies. As they prepared to extract, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. "We've been made," hissed one of the human operatives. Edward's mind raced, calculating their options. "Plan Omega," he commanded. The team nodded, understanding the risk involved. Using his gravitational powers, Edward created localized fields of intense gravity around key structural points in the outpost. As they sprinted towards their extraction point, the facility began to buckle and collapse behind them, bearing evidence of their presence. They reached their ship just as enemy forces converged on their position. As they lifted off, weaving through a hail of weapons fire, Edward sent an encrypted burst transmission to Kira, updating her on the situation. Back on Daxam, Kira received Edward's message with a mix of relief and concern. She quickly made the decision to relocate their research to Nexus Prime, recognizing the station's strategic importance and advanced facilities. As she oversaw the secure transfer of their deep-sea samples and research data, Kira's mind was already formulating plans to enhance the station's defenses. She knew that the combination of their unique abilities and Nexus Prime's technology could create an impenetrable shield against the coming storm. As their ship approached Nexus Prime, Kira felt a surge of anticipation. She and Edward were about to reunite, armed with crucial information and groundbreaking scientific discoveries. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, protecting the future of human-Daxamite relations and pushing the boundaries of what was possible when two species work as one. The station loomed large in their view screen, a symbol of unity and hope in the vast expanse of space. As they prepared to dock, Kira allowed herself a moment of reflection. The journey that had brought her and Edward to this point had been fraught with danger and sacrifice, but it had also forged them into something greater than either species alone could have produced. With renewed purpose, Kira stepped onto Nexus Prime, ready to merge their scientific breakthroughs with Edward's intelligence coup. The next phase of their mission was about to begin, and the fate of two worlds hung in the balance.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.